The most recent, I saw Jason had a whole bunch of comments last night.
Oh, last night, no, I didn't,
Oh, no.
I don't think anybody,
I
I
didn't get that. Anything.
Are we
Are we
don't
on?
think anybody.
Okay. So we can begin?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we will begin the meeting, and again, happy birthday to Patrice and to Alicia. And, thank you all for being here this morning for a, longer meeting. Both Andy and I really appreciate it. We have had Andy and I have had some discussions with, Jeff Curry, who's co-chair of the Education Committee, and very, very interested in this task force. And he, again, has made it clear that, the first report will be a findings report, not a recommendations report. And, we should take our time and ensure that the findings that we put forward first are, by consensus of the group. And, you know, Andy had a great idea. I think if we're not in consensus, there may be a section of the report that says these are findings that, we're not in agreement, on across the task force, but we'll continue to discuss. And so, you know, I feel very comfortable with that. I've said we want to have, significant recommendations but realistic ones in 2025, and this is the pathway to it. And so I appreciate your time. I know we're not all here all the time, but thank you. I also need to tell you that I need to leave at 11:45. It's just a conflict that is, I have a meeting with the Speaker of the House, and I don't want to say no, even though this task force is incredibly important, but we also have some legislative priorities to get forward, one of which is very connected to the task force, excess cost. So with that said, we can begin our discussion. I want to start one thing by saying this year, the superintendents have brought to my attention this week that the excess cost payments this year, and it does concern us, are some of the lowest that they've ever seen in terms of excess cost. And the reason we think is the underestimation of the cost of excess cost way back in the first year of the biennial last year, and more special ed kids this year. But for instance, I just know Bethel, but you can find it. I sent it out to all of the superintendents yesterday, but Bethel, for instance, is, it had expected an 88% reimbursement in the tier, and they're less than 70% this year.
Yeah.
So,
That's a big,
yeah,
same.
it's serious,
That's
and
not-
so it's,
Yeah,
more
it
than
is.
ever, incredibly important for us to, be pushing on this task force for excess costs, as we are in apps in our priorities. So I wanted to begin there, and then
Well, on
turn
that
it over
point,
to
Brian
Andy.
Had promised us some figures on excess costs, so they're still forthcoming.
They are, yeah, they're working on it. Excess cost the excess cost reimbursement, we're working on the difference between in-district, or the percentage of students that are in districts
Okay.
that qualify versus out-of-district programs. So we define that as anything besides in the LEA, so it could be, you know, an outplacement at a REST, or an out-of-district placement, or even another public high school if it wasn't. So that's the way that the split is gonna happen. And then a district by district total of reimbursement.
And as to the point that Fran just made, do you have any information on that?
Yeah.
It's just, you know, the analysis.
The appropriations went up substantially.
Well,
Yeah.
25 million, there was 25 million more in, but that, I think, just brought the appropriation to 181 million, whereas the actual cost is well over it was 210, about 210 million last year, and it's substantially higher this year, which is why people are getting paid at far less than what Senator Rooney, anticipated in the tiers.
Those might be an issue worth exploring as well. I mean, but the other thing is per pupil costs have gone up substantially as the population's gone down and costs have increased,
Yeah.
which means 4.5 times becomes that much higher.
Yeah,
And so that also results in reduced reimbursements. But I also think, and maybe Amy can talk a little bit about this, that, you know, if it's not a substantial, the paperwork involved is enough, that if it's not a substantial amount over 4.5 times, it may not even be worth filing.
True. It's not that hard though. I think what you get is you get a couple of kids that you only get like 1,000 or 2,000 for. And when it's readjusted in March, some of those kids, because they were absent a day or two, it falls down. So some districts wait a little bit to get those custody kids. So, yeah, and it's not, I don't think I wouldn't say the paperwork is an issue.
Okay.
In district kids, paperwork is an issue because you've got do a lot of calculations and sometimes it's just not worth it. Out of district's a little bit more cut and dry. That makes sense.
Like
No, that makes sense, and that's really helpful information.
Yeah.
transportation, shared,
Well, I
shared
understand that.
cost, how many kids are on the vehicle, how many times do they
Yeah,
ride,
It's not worth it if it's only a couple of thousand to go through getting benefits and salaries and okay, you're 1/8 and you know, how many kids are on the wheelchair vehicle.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
You know, yeah, you can claim those, but it's not worth the time it takes to calculate all those little things. Unless you've got a really
Perfect system.
like a kid with a one-to-one nurse and a
That's
wheelchair,
easy,
like that you
yes,
can kind of get
correct.
that stuff.
Well, it's nice to hear in at least one instance where the paperwork created by the State Department of Education is not a burden.
No, not at all. Not at all. Nope.
so this morning, as you know, we're going to just, continue with our, discussion of, Andy's letter, so to speak. And I just want to make it clear to everybody that this is Andy's letter. This was put forward to us. I consider it a great jumping off point, but it in no way reflects that what this task force will put forward. Some of it we will, but some of it we won't.
Well, the other thing is that a Google Drive, I deleted comments to get a clean copy. And where people said, I disagree with this, I just deleted those comments because we'll discuss that. Not because I rejected your rejection. But I think you get a message back saying the comment was rejected,
Yeah,
which is not the message at all.
so,
And I think on the next section on behavior, words matter a lot.
Yeah.
And we've got to be
Yes.
really clear on.
we have to be
Yes.
very, very clear on this piece. Go ahead, Andy.
Well, no,
I'll head
let's
it
go
in.
back.
Good
Good. I
morning.
know, I probably. Maybe you actually thought you were early for the 9:30 meeting. but We moved it to 9.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So
I'd love to dive in,
dive in.
Please.
offer maybe a first comment on behavior.
Yes, we're going to talk about behavior and I anticipate that this will, and we both anticipate that this will be a long discussion, in-depth discussion, lots of different perspectives and that's absolutely fine because it's an important piece of where we're going.
Where's going?
No, it's being recorded.
Okay, so it's.
You are nervous.
Well, no, I mean, she takes such
No,
complete notes on comments. I
yeah,
don't wanna
but
take them all.
she records it on her own. We have a AI, so I told her it was okay for her to leave. Yeah. So, at any rate, go ahead, Karen.
What heading are you starting under?
Under behavior, that's where we left
Yeah.
off, right?
Yeah.
So, my first suggestion would be to not start with troubling behaviors often exhibited by students with disabilities, but perhaps something like Students with disabilities face many challenges that impact their ability to learn and be present and engage in what school has to offer.
That sounds
Much more positive.
Yeah, maybe start with a more positive
Did
spin.
you put that on the Google Drive?
I did not.
Here, I'll do it for you.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
I would agree with.
I need to see it.
Oh, good.
Can you read from this side?
Okay, go ahead. Students with disabilities, oh, got it.
Mhm.
I can keep going. You want me to keep going?
Please.
Yeah,
Okay, then I would take out, then you can say something like troubling behavior may be exhibited by students with disabilities. I would take out, this is not surprising. If a student is unable to learn side by side with typical peers, the student is likely to experience frustration, anger, or alienation. Sometimes this can lead to dysregulated behavior. And then I would take out the period after behavior, and then I would add a new sentence. This behavior is likely communicating something and often serves multiple purposes. Be present and engage in what school has to offer. And then the last sentence, I just don't know if there's, do we have data for that?
Which one?
The, notwithstanding the statutory criteria for eligibility, often behavior that leads to eligibility for special education.
I had the same question, like, is that an opinion or is that?
Well, there are guidance from the state that say that students whose behavior should be evaluated. I mean, so I mean, I think it is a trigger,
Well, yeah, there's a statute, the child find statute, yeah.
Yeah. But is that,
That could be referred to.
I would even say adverse instead of troubling behavior. I think we're changing that sentence, right? So I think we.
I changed it, I just changed the is often to may be,
Well-
but I kept troubling behavior.
well, I mean, dysregulated, troubling, maladaptive, I mean, what do we want to use?
I like
It's, I like it's regulated, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
dysregulated, yeah. I mean, I don't like it, but I like it.
What do we think about that last sentence in that first paragraph?
Well, I think we change it to reference, the child find statute, that's where it is. That it can be.
So instead of leads to eligibility, leads to, triggering child find? Would that make sense?
My only concern with that is that that sounds, sort of a little technical talk, leads to
Yeah.
evaluating a child as eligible, sort of thing. Is more the question.
Well, why do we begin with
yes,
notwithstanding
right.
the statutory criteria?
Okay. Sure.
It's actually under the statutory criteria
For eligibility.
for, yeah.
I mean, maybe we don't need it at all,
Right, we don't, I don't think.
Maybe we don't need
Not
that
sure it's
sentence at all.
necessary.
right? Okay,
Does anybody feel strongly about it?
no, that's it.
Okay,
The whole sentence gone.
read in the first paragraph, second paragraph.
Okay, do you want me to keep going?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
So instead of dealing with that behavior, I said, addressing the behavior in the regular education environment is critical. Though I do think, I didn't write this, but though I do think addressing the troubling or dysregulated behavior is important in any educational setting,
Right.
including outplacements. So we might just want to say addressing the behavior in educational environments.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
settings or
Yeah.
something, cross settings.
Yep,
In all
Do you wanna
education
change it?
environments, in all.
in all.
Education environment. Yeah. Is somebody doing it in the, I think,
I don't-
Amy is, right?
I only did that first sentence. I can continue, but I don't.
well, I
know
think,
anything
we're
about-
having the notes here, though. I'll.
Okay.
You're
take
good with
the
taking the
and
notes?
send
Okay,
it
okay,
out as a revised version,
That sounds great.
so let's.
So addressing the behavior?
Addressing.
Addressing the behavior in all educational environments is critical. The next one, I've just said the first and most important step is to understand.
Could you
The
just speak
function.
up a little
Sure,
bit?
sorry, yeah. The first and most important step is to understand the function the behavior
Yes,
serves
not
for the
what can be
student.
done.
Yes. Mhm. And then, the remainder of that paragraph is, Dr. Ross Green's work. Lagging skills is his term. And, Dr. Green has a really great approach, to addressing, some challenging behavior. I think it might be good to reference a variety of approaches. So there's, Dr. Green's approach, there's functional behavioral assessment, there might be, trauma-informed care approaches. And, given that this is a findings document, it might be helpful to identify those with maybe just a brief sentence about
Well,
summary.
I mean,
That's just from
Um,
CCOMs.
can you send some brief summaries?
Yes.
Of each of those approaches?
Yep. Absolutely,
Yeah, I think nowadays, especially the trauma-based approach is really important.
right. So instead of,
Well,
Okay.
I agree with you, Amy, except that all too often, we just talk about that in terms of a title and jargon.
I don't disagree.
And,
Absolutely.
and, you know, we don't know what it
Right.
means.
Right, so I think maybe if you don't want to use trauma-based, but maybe we say, other social-emotional factors, or, it's not just skill-based. There are other kids who just
Mhm.
psychiatrically, like there's other factors.
You know, what I'd really like to have here is, sort of the inventory of the behavioral approaches and citations to people who promote
Mhm.
them,
mhm.
Yeah,
rather than,
Yeah.
just being, summary about it.
yeah, that makes sense.
And
Do we,
Karen's gonna do that for us.
I'm happy to do that, and if people have things they want to send me, include that, and then put it on the drive.
I don't know if someone saw my hand up. Good
Yes.
morning, everyone.
Good
So,
morning.
good morning and happy birthday. I just wanted to say, a couple of different things. I think that really putting out there Ross Green's work, I think would be a mistake. I don't think we should name it specifically. I think it should be more generic. And then the other thing, I did hear a little bit of the conversation about the trauma-informed practice, but I think that really some of that comes more from a deficit lens versus trying to build on resilience. So I just think we have to just wordsmith and making sure that even some of the approaches that we have are rooted in kind of more generic and not leading to one approach. I definitely wouldn't put Ross Green's information in there. I don't personally believe in his work, but I'm just saying that I think we have to look at multiple approaches as what was said, but I don't think we should be naming people.
I go the opposite way. I think we ought to, have 3 or 4 different approaches with names of authors on them.
I think that if we look at a behavioral approach, it doesn't necessarily have to be, Andy, that we name people and we name things, right? Similar to what we do in IEPs, we don't name people and name things. We look at the approach and like really what are we trying to do? So if we're trying to address the social emotional behavior supports of students, then really looking at, really making sure that, folks are looking at, behavioral services that are going to best meet or match the needs of our students.
This is an area where there is substantial research, substantial science to support it. And we ought to list those that have evidence-based, it seems to me.
I understand, but I don't think we'll all come to an agreement on what that actually is and should we box people into that. I believe that there's a lot of scientifically research-based things similar to in the science of reading. We have a lot of different scientifically research-based, intervention programs in the area of reading, similar in the area of social emotional behavioral health, where we have to just kind of provide the parameters, the guidepost, and then really, allowing for people from that point and forward to be able to manage.
I think if you have multiple things cited,
You're
kind of a menu,
yeah.
and I agree that, I think we could do both things. I think Tiffany wants us to describe it and not, say, buy this package, it's the way to go. So I think, and I know you don't want that either. I think if we can just be specific in the words and then we footnote everything, examples such as, I think that might accomplish both things. Sorry, I just came in and I don't really know what we're talking about, but I.
Good comment. though.
But my friend here helps me.
That never stopped you before.
Anyways.
Yeah, I was
Right,
gonna have a
right, I
bet,
gotcha.
I was gonna have a bet with Fran as to how long this meeting would go before the science reading came up. But,
Well, I don't think we can say that we have an exhaustive list in our
No,
document
right.
either, and I think that that needs to be referenced as well, that
right,
these are some examples,
Or like,
and I don't know all of them, I am, not a special ed teacher.
or maybe
Here as
research.
a parent, but I think we definitely need to reference the fact that this is not an exhaustive list that we are using.
Tiffany has her hand up again.
Doesn't it, and does a list already exist somewhere that we could, like, are we recreating something? Like, is there a document? I'm thinking like in the state or something now. I just wondering, where we could say,
So one consideration could be that we
Rather
make
than-
reference to, there are a number of evidence-based
behavioral approaches.
behavioral approaches and not name them, because I think we
Yes.
are gonna get into
Yeah.
looking like we're endorsing one thing over
Right.
another, and inevitably we are going to miss something.
Yep.
Right.
And depending on disability, the behavioral approach you're gonna take may look
Not
different.
ours.
Correct,
Should be individual.
yes,
And it's a purview of the local district to use what they feel
Right.
is most important, and putting one over another, I don't think is a good thing to stop. Yes, I don't want it to be said, well, I chose this.
Yeah, because-
Approach because
because-
that's where so
Right.
that's not,
Not
where I would want us to come from.
So I would suggest that we, and I'm happy to do this as part of that. My assignment just got a lot shorter, which is great. But I think that we can't, that, I have to rework that paragraph, because if we say lagging skills, that's definitely documented.
yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'll use different language.
okay,
Okay,
well,
got it.
that's fine, I mean, in your research, Karen, you may come up with learn an article which lists a variety of behavior
Yeah,
approaches
yeah.
you can just cite to.
Yeah,
without
What Works
recommendation.
Clearinghouse, has some documents.
what works?
What Works Clearinghouse,
Mhm.
yeah, like that evidence-based practice.
Great, thank you.
But I also think that Brian made the critical point that it's not the district determined behavioral approach, it's an individualized
Correct.
determination for each child.
Right.
I have a question or a request, I guess. I'd like to spend some time on the de-escalation piece. Because I think that's really complicated. I think we say it often. What does it actually mean and what do we want to see? Do we, for instance, believe that the higher ed institutions that are preparing our kids, our candidates for teaching, do enough of training in, how to manage your classroom and how to de-escalate behavior? That's one piece. The other piece, and you've heard me say it every single meeting, is the class size matters in de-escalation and being able to spend time with those students to de-escalate behavior. And I agree totally that behavior is many times based on, or poor behavior is many times based on lagging skills. If kids can't read, they have a need to act out, to, just protect themselves. And so I wonder if we could just spend time on that, because I do think there should be some, not recommendations, but some findings in there on de-escalation, and maybe I'm wrong.
Well, the other
Maybe you
part of
do- wait, just 1 minute, Andy, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you do think that our teachers by and large have those skills and training and, are able to de-escalate in most cases. I don't know, and I don't want to presume anything. You're the experts.
I have a question. Could we write in here that we need to do more research on that topic as part of one of our findings, that we need to spend more time on it? If we don't have the data here, and I just want to put that in the room, if we don't have that information now, could we say in the document that that's something we're gonna spend time on over the next several months.
What I wanted to say was, and I think Sally is probably the key on this, is that, you know, de-escalation falls within the rubric of MTSS. And that really ought to be the focus, multi-tiered system of support, both to prevent both to stop behavior from occurring in the first place, and as a key to de-escalation, really needs to be seen as a sort of a organic whole. And that,
And MTSS is not a value judgment or a philosophy, it's just a framework. So like, I think that's broadly sufficient enough in that way that like, it doesn't feel like we're being prescriptive and methods. And it is prescriptive, like the state is supposed to be doing it.
I mean, I just, you know, my reaction to de-escalation is, you know, often too late, and we, you know, we really need to be dealing with the things that lead to that behavior in the first place. And also obviously train on de-escalation. Fran's question obviously was, are the, teacher training programs provided enough in those areas? And I don't have any answer to that.
Well, I think de-escalation is a pretty broad term, and so we're talking about going from a general education setting where like a classroom management course you might take in your, you know, preparatory training may help with some of those things, all the way up to a kid is in this. And we're talking about how to de-escalate to avoid emergency use of restraint or seclusion. And so to me, that's such a broad term. That, and depending on the setting you're working in or how you're working in, I think that term means something very different.
Yeah.
And so we have to consider that when we're putting that in the report.
Yeah, and the challenge is that sometimes your skills and knowledge and experience actually escalate the situation unintentionally. If you don't know the student, if you don't know their triggers, you may not understand ever what's triggered a student at a given moment, or your positioning, or the words you're using, all those things, you know, factor in. But we do have requirements around restraint and seclusion and crisis teams for folks to be trained in de-escalation. But, you know, originally when that legislation came out, it was for all educators, and that we kind of back off of that to the crisis teams. And but it's a great point that there's such a range.
And then it goes back to the, not to beat a dead horse, but to the staffing issue. You know, when you're struggling with staffing, we all know that the consistency of the people and the training of the adults is so important. And the reality is that we don't have that in schools right now. So I think we need to be honest about that. That's a real challenge. You know.
Well, the other point about that though, is that would not limit it to talking about teacher training. I mean, we're talking about para training.
Of course,
Very big way.
yes.
I would also say substitute training.
Yes, I mean,
I've been a substitute in my past, and you get bloodborne pathogens and walk around the classroom and check out everybody. There's no de-escalation, and I have been in situations where I didn't even know how to call the office because there was no information given to me, or that I even had a student that had a para in the room. So you have to think about substitutes, and there's nothing consistent from district to district.
They never show, I mean, I think I know the answer, but they don't show you an IEP, they don't tell you.
No, there's nothing, there's nothing.
They don't even tell you, do they even tell you as one, or do you?
No,
Not,
you can't, no,
no, they
you
don't
can't
tell
share
you.
that, no.
I mean, you could share that.
Well, our school district, they don't allow you to share that information.
If
To a
they,
substitute?
To a substitute.
If
So if
they-
I'm out, I may have a note about, don't let this kid go to the bathroom. But that's all I can write down. I don't need any information about any of
But
my
they
special
don't-
ed students.
They don't allow it, or they just don't do it as a?
They, as a policy, we do not share information about IEPs with substitute teachers.
But substitute teachers sign,
But we're not-
they won't
we're not-
say anything, they sign agreements.
Yeah,
I just, you know, I wasn't talking about the de-escalation that Brian was talking
Yeah.
about under, you know, seclusion and restraint. I was talking about generally in the classroom. You know, I go back to when I was an administrator in Bridgeport for many years. Do you remember Harry Wong, the first days of school?
yes.
I spent an awful long time with
Amazing.
new teachers
Technical buff.
on those kinds of strategies in setting up your classroom and getting kids, you know, in that mindset. And then, you know, through the social emotional piece, through the ruler training that was, pretty much continued along those lines. And I just wonder if we do enough of that. I'm not talking the serious behavior, I'm talking, Jim, Jab and Joe and how you, de-escalate that. I just don't know if we're doing enough of that. I mean, I can tell you from my experience, but it's dated, that we weren't spending enough time on that.
Well, Fran, I think that speaks to classroom management, more so than de-escalation, and, when I think
Yeah.
about that. And also thinking about not only preparation for classroom management, but classroom management with a trauma-informed lens, because the reality is, the students that are showing up in classrooms are showing up there with all kinds of precursory experiences that are then potentially leading to what triggers them into behavior. And so educators having a strong understanding of trauma and exposure to trauma and what that might look like, as well as classroom management skills to set up a predictable environment for kids, is an essential precursor that I don't think a lot of educators may have right now, given the staffing issues we're having.
And culturally responsive pedagogy also, like, so there's other foundational practices that have to have, it's like, what comes first?
But
So what
that's
is-
really helpful to me, because maybe we don't call it, de-escalation, maybe we call it classroom management and that type of thing. I don't know, but I think it needs to be in there,
What's
somewhere.
the finding?
Yeah, just,
Yeah,
yeah,
like
I'm
what,
trying to, because what's the special education component
Right.
of that finding? Is it back to MTSS?
Right.
Inter,
Is it that tier one,
tiered
like-
interventions, understanding the students. Because we do specifically call out restraint and seclusion in this section, so.
Yeah, just to speak a bit to teacher preparation, I can speak to two different universities. We have one course to prepare special educators, K-12 across disability categories. So we have a course that's not just classroom management, it is tiered levels of support. But for classroom management, in my experience as a teacher educator, that's the thing that they really need to practice in the classroom, what they're learning on the university campus, because there's a lot of disconnects and each student is so unique. And so I think that there could be something to be said about aligning teacher preparation, coursework and expectations with clinical supervision, student teaching or internships, so that we have, cohesion there, because whatever we teach them at the university, if they go out and see something different, or a teacher maybe isn't able to explain what they're doing or why they're doing it, then there's disconnects there, and they learn more about from what they see in their placements than what they get from us. That's just, there's a lot of research behind that. So, I think there could be a finding about aligning teacher prep in service, pre-service with in-service, but I think it has a lot more to do with levels of support, MTSS and levels of support, to try to proactively manage the behavior or coordinate the behavior, so you don't end up having to do this de-escalation.
Well, we certainly ought to equate teachers, as substitutes, with the tools that are available and with a description of sort of what we know about when a particular tool is to be effective and when it's not gonna be effective. And that course doesn't exist now, right?
Not for paras, or
Well, how about
substitute
teachers?
teachers. I mean, we get paras, sometimes we get paras that are becoming special ed teachers, but
Right.
just for paras.
No, but how about for teachers? So is that course, the tools you might use?
Yeah, I mean, we had that at Central, it's one course, so it's 3 credits for everything you might need about behavior.
And you're learning in isolation,
Yeah.
we have to be real about.
Of course.
Well, the first
You know.
module of team is classroom management.
Yes.
And you're so green and new,
Yeah.
like you learn it, you take that, you write a paper, you're done. And you really, like you see, if you're a team mentor, that they're still not yet, it takes a long time to get those tools in your toolbox. Like every student's different, so every time I get a new one, I gotta start all over.
Yeah.
So no matter what, you're always learning, so
And when you're newer, you take it more personally, you get
Exactly.
involved too much, right? So then it makes it
And you
worse.
think, oh my God, I'm failing, I'm not
Yeah.
doing this right, what am I failing with these kids?
Well, can we sort of think boldly about what kind of a scheme would actually be useful here?
For who? For the educators or for the kids? Educators?
Well, I think, ultimately for the kids, but yes, but for, educators on all different levels, what you said, Stephanie, was, suggests that a program of mentorship for new teachers would make a lot of sense.
Well, that's
Yeah,
what
we have that.
That's what team is. But possibly the opportunity for like, ongoing professional learning that is any educator could easily access when needed, because there's also that idea of like at different times in your career, you need different, depending on who's in front of you or when you're able to process it. So we had some opportunities for choice, like we want with our students, where people can, get the kind of maybe a micro credentialing or a badging or something where you can get the training that you need. Where every district isn't recreating some of these things. Like, yes, you're gonna tweak it for your setting, but if there's common research-based practices that we can be sharing widely and people can access in a meaningful way when they need it, there may be value to that.
So we can talk about mandated training until 2:00 today.
No, thank you.
Right.
I'm all set.
But what are you actually suggesting there?
So for example, could there be some type of, maybe asynchronous learning experiences that we could provide for educators, that anyone could access, when they need it? And like, you can kind of stack those things. You could say like, okay, I did level 1 of culturally responsive pedagogy. I'd like to do number 2. And I have this little badge of like a culture or something. Like other states do this kind of work. And when you think about it that way, then we're all not trying to produce the same type of learning experiences across. It doesn't mean that you're not going to maybe then customize it for your context, but there's certain foundational research, research-based practices that we can maybe share widely. And also when we think about, if we think about educators instead of teachers, we're thinking about how do different people in different roles, BCBA, school psych, para, many people could benefit from access to these things. I don't know, just trying to think out, you said think outside the box.
What I'm hearing is that maybe this is not really appropriate for teacher training, that it's really much more effective once the teachers.
Maybe in general, like tier 1, right?
Being proactive, not
course.
reactive, we keep
Of
saying that, I think,
course.
is like being
I would
proactive,
say-
and you train, and
Yes.
you're going into the system and saying, I don't remember getting any of that in that. Because you're just trying to get through all the courses,
Correct.
trying to get your head around it, then you get to student teaching. I did DSAP, so I was already working in the school, so I had the advantage because I knew the kids. And I was already prepared with what we did. I had all those tools. I had more tools. I had more tools than most people coming out of college. But it's, we've also started seeing, and I'm at a risk, so we have those more challenging because they've come to us. And we do get a lot of that support. But again, classroom management, you just want to keep your head
Yeah,
over the water. You're just like, anything I need to do, okay, yep. And then move to the next thing. And like, just.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean in apps instead of.
No.
I was thinking in addition to, in a more flexible, like because people, you could be 7 years in your career, 12 years, and you have a new student in front, it doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with time and seat
No.
time.
Well, I don't know that every seasoned educator has had trauma-informed
No,
No, right.
or culturally responsive opportunities to learn about that. I know NEA offers micro-credentials, but you have to be an NEA member to access that and then have time to do that
Yeah.
also. So I don't even think most seasoned teachers have even had a conversation around that. And I don't know that we mandate it, but if we open opportunities,
And I think the PD is supposed to turn a certain way. It's supposed to be about options. It's not
yes,
a one size fits all over. So that, pushing that gives you opportunities. Now we just have to find them. Like, rests are great. They have many opportunities for PD. But again, and under this
guys, I'm not sure, even as a special ed facility, we're only in our program and that's kind of what we do. It's not like we're asking our own reps, can you give us trauma and, you know, we do what they give us, but also you don't wanna pigeonhole people and say, well, because we do this at our place, means you can't go out and do something else, which is not what this new
Right.
model is supposed to be,
Mhm.
but sometimes it's what's happened.
Mhm.
Even for our parents, because we try to give them the same training we're getting.
How about, talk to me about the arguments for and against micro-credentialing. Where you might have, you know, 3 levels of behavior micro-credentials, based on coursework.
Well, an opportunity forward is if you add it to your resume, you say you've received these badges in case you change district from one to another. We know paras move from one district to another frequently. And it might help if you have those micro credentials already, makes you more marketable to a different school district, or perhaps you don't have to start all over again with the new district. And if we recognize those at the state level, maybe that offers opportunities for teachers and all educators really to be able to say they've achieved those.
You're not duplicating efforts in the creation of the learning experience. So I'm not creating something and Heather's creating something and Tara's again, I understand that, you know, there's gonna be a foundation and then you tweak it, but we're not all every district is not trying to recreate the same thing. So you're, you know,
Is there any micro-credentialing now?
We don't.
in Connecticut, no, but in others.
In other states, there are.
Yes.
And, I mean, but for example, in reading, I mean, you know, you hear about people with various levels of OG certification or various levels of Wilson certification. Which
That's
is,
not, but those are certifications.
The universities are starting to have certificate programs. I don't know that they're calling them like.
Yeah,
credentials,
yes.
But like we had at Sacred Heart, we have a dyslexia certificate program that could then eventually lead to a degree, but it's on its own. And I think other universities are considering that as well.
well, it seems to me that behavior has got to be one of the biggest issues out there, right? For teachers, for related, and it's related to special education, of course. And so, you know, is there sentiment to make a recommendation to explore some sort of credentialing or micro credentials?
Finding.
Finding, yes.
Finding in the area of behavior, with, you know, including both rigorous coursework and I suppose
Well-
practice, but of course, that's for teachers who already get into practice.
I thought we did this in our committee, or I could be
I wanna look
blurring
ahead. I
this with
think
a
we
different
did.
committee. But I think a finding could be that states, you know, that there are other ways of thinking about professional learning.
Tiffany made a comment, which I could not read.
I don't know who's controlling the computer.
I can't,
All right.
Maybe she can just say it.
That was-
I was just saying, sorry, what I was just saying in the chat is that I just think that I know we had conversations even about this whole SRBI process in the past. And I think that we just have to make sure that we're not just owning behavior in special education, because to your point, behavior is crucial and it's a critical area. But I will tell you that even some of the behaviors that we're seeing, even in district, is not just about a special education issue. I think we're taking on a lot of issues in special education. And I think you're going to hear me say this over and over again. We have to preserve our profession. So as much that has to be, even if we are talking about the behavior pieces, that it's something that's also owned in general education, that it's not just something where we're continuing to bear the burden in special ed and somehow represent it that way.
Also, the new educator and leader of Val talks really about professional learning. And so if you're thinking about, you know, setting your goals and you would have access to maybe differentiated opportunities for choice and things like that, that maybe, you know, as a school leader, you can't provide everything in the whole wide world to everybody. But maybe this year I need something for my class that Patrice doesn't need. And it's just, it allows for choice, differentiation, access. We're not saying it's a must do, it can be a may do, but if we're trying, again, like Tiffany said, if we're trying to preserve the profession, we have to think about how we're supporting all educators.
So maybe the finding is, less about, or it incorporates de-escalation, but is a little bit more broad and leaves it open for us to dig a little bit deeper, kind of going a little bit, with, the previous comment, just that, something about, the multi-tiered systems of support, de-escalation, classroom management.
Proactive.
Yeah, proactive, and that the task force, wants to look into this topic further, identify potential opportunities for professional development. Maybe that's our finding.
Well, the one other piece of that, and I'm posing this as a question, is there's obviously a body of knowledge out there, science, research-based initiatives dealing with behavior. And teachers are out there dealing with behavior day by day in every school in the state. But they don't seem to be, the question is, are they aware of this research-based literature of the
Yes,
functions?
they're very, I think they're aware, it's just how, there's so many things on their plate. Are you talking about teachers?
Teachers, paras,
Yeah.
substantives.
I don't know, I don't think it's a lack of awareness.
It might be district.
No, some students are like, please come in, I'm here to bring your pajamas.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
If you find them.
I mean, I think there's always room for learning, always. But I think, I could speak for my school. I mean, this is a population that we work with that has challenging behavior. And a lot of our professional development is about how do we address challenging behavior, prevent it, de-escalate it, safely respond to it. How do we modify the environment? I mean, we
Right.
spend all the live long day talking about.
But in a
It's not
school that is
challenging,
not,
it's dysregulated behavior excited.
Dysregulated, right?
and a school that is not as, receiving all of those students in a regular, we don't spend all our time on that. We have a lot of other things on our plate in terms of professional development. And perhaps most teachers know that it's out there, but don't know how or when to access it, or have the ability to access that instead of maybe something else that they've already learned that they're sitting through. We have a PD day half-day PD day on Thursday. And the math teachers advocated to do something with SAT scores and the online stuff. So we were actually able to get out of what everybody else is doing. But I don't know that every teacher knows how to advocate to get out of what the district is providing to do some of these other things that might be, so I think to look into possible micro-credentialing, possible opportunities for PD that we might, as a state, be able to offer similar to other states, but we need to do a little bit more research on it before we can make any recommendations, but that could be a finding, I think.
Yeah, and I would say, obviously my experience is in more challenged districts, and I would say in Bridgeport, I mean, part of my frustration as a longtime administrator there was that, we would hire brand new teachers every year, and at the end of the year, I'd lose probably 150 to 200 teachers. And when I did exit interviews as a superintendent, they told me, they want to feel successful every day. And they were having major issues not with the academic skills, but with the behavior. And there wasn't available, and I didn't have the resources, and they did not have available to them probably the skills and knowledge that they needed, number one, and number two, there was no one else to assist with it. And, I'm just aware, they're our most vulnerable children, and this lack of consistency in teachers, I didn't blame them, I understand that they need to feel successful. But it is an ongoing problem in our large cities, I think.
I think it's
I
everywhere.
don't know what.
There's
Tiffany
more
would
and more
say,
movement than.
Well, but I would agree with Fran, even I taught in Waterbury for almost 10 years, most of the teachers that are there for less than 5 years. Every year, there's 150 to 200 new teachers at the new teacher workshop. Every year, we would take buses around the school. And I stayed there for longer than most, and And it's tough because what we were talking about, your first few years, you're figuring it out. So,
Right, and special ed isn't gonna solve all the problems.
It's not,
We're the
but-
special ed task force, but
Yes.
obviously
But to
for the
focus on-
child, there's lots of intersection
Mhm.
that maybe some is working and maybe some is totally absent and maybe the school isn't aware and, you know, I mean, so there's just, it's hard to talk about this, I think, in a vacuum of just special education without, I know that's our focus, but special ed alone can't solve the problem.
right,
So we're talking about the teacher portion of behavior. In special ed, so wonderful how you teach self-advocacy to the students. Is there a way to give the students and the parents some sort of training for themselves for de-escalation behavior tools? That way, if there is a teacher turnover, that student or parent is still there with the same tools. So there's some sort of consistency, because I just think the self-advocacy has created so many wonderful special education students who are leaders and helpers, and I just didn't know if.
Well, parent training is clearly a related service in the
Okay.
IDEA, and so you could see recommendations for parent training are certainly within our bailiwick.
Well, I would say that in the findings, here's one where you taught me right from the beginning that regular ed and special ed, regular ed influences special ed, correct? And how we operate in regular ed is, you know, has an influence on special ed. So I would say in the findings that we include all of this conversation in terms of, behavior.
Can I just add one more little nugget? In our district, over the last 4 years, we've made a large push to actually work with, staff on their own mental health and their own ability to understand where they're coming from and how they're approaching their students. So, okay, today I'm not in a good space. When so-and-so does this, I need to take a breath before so we've really invested a lot in, reflection, and it's called Nurtured Heart that we're doing, but it's all about how to really address yourself before you can even work with the students. So just in terms of teacher care and teacher mental health, I do think that's a large part of, and it kind of goes back to what you're saying and what you were saying in terms of just being able to manage coming to work every day with the challenges. And when you're not in a good space, no matter what Steve or Johnny does, it's harder to manage because you're not yourself in a good space.
Agree.
Yeah, right. So it's like you're at each other because neither one of you are in a good
So-
space that day. So I just think that's a huge component.
The findings should include that, well, not mental health.
Not mental health.
Emotional.
Social,
Yeah,
emotional,
support.
social, emotional.
Social
support.
emotional support for.
But that's also, that's co-regulation, right,
Yeah.
it's like a de-escalation strategy. I mean,
Yeah, and that's really
parenting
what
every day is what I'm doing,
Yeah.
right?
But it is that emotional support.
It
program
is.
For,
And
you
it's
know,
huge.
I laugh sometimes, I'm sure some of you do. My first years as a teacher, I used to spend probably half my salary just on, prizes to keep the kids well behaved, and incentives for behavior. I don't think I had the skills either, in the beginning, to really be able to work with each child and look at myself. I was so worried about what the principal was gonna think that, I would do anything to keep those kids quiet, but I'm not sure I taught them how to improve their behavior either. So I appreciate the conversation because I do think it is one that I have encountered where, teachers are just frustrated and don't know how to deal with it. And many times, those were the kids that were recommended for special ed. And I'm not saying that some of them didn't need it, but I'm wondering if we had tried different things, whether it could have been different.
On teachers, Brian, I made a request a while ago, I never got anything for average length of service of regular ed teachers and special ed teachers. And, can you see with the like that it's available? My perception is that the average length of service of special ed teachers is shorter than that of general ed teachers. I don't know whether that's true, but I'd like to know whether that's in fact true. And, you know, it could be a whole bunch of factors, but.
Yeah.
But the,
Nationally, the attrition rates for special ed teachers are higher, but I don't know Connecticut's specific rates.
Can you
where's
say
the data
that
on
again?
Nationally, this attrition, like special ed teachers leave more, like
More.
there's more of them
Yeah.
that leave. Burnout's higher, attrition's higher
Yeah.
for special ed teachers. There was a Connecticut specific report in 2019, I think, but I don't know if they called out that stat.
If we could find that, it would be really helpful.
Yeah,
I
can have that.
appreciate the conversation.
well,
Anything else?
and while you're on, what I suggested is, you know, thinking boldly.
Of course he did.
It's all recorded, we can listen to it.
Yeah.
Thinking boldly about, you know, how you deal with this, what's going, you know, dealing with the behavior issue in schools. And that led to this discussion of possible micro-credentialing, but also general finding about this area. So,
About what?
about the area,
Yeah.
about what you do with behavior.
Yeah.
Um,
So the next piece starts to deal with physical restraint and seclusion. And we all know that that has been incredibly controversial, you know, professionally and personally. I've been involved in situations where I wish it didn't exist. Okay, but it does exist, and I've been told and better informed, I think, about if we just didn't have seclusion and restraint, there are many outside placements that wouldn't be able to take our kids. And so I need more information on it. I need more education on it from you. And I need more discussion around the table, because it was a huge piece at the legislative session last year, where people just had horrific stories and, you know, they were heart-wrenching, and, you know, people wanted it done away with completely. And so this task force is going to be very crucial in making recommendations in 25, not now, but recommendations as to seclusion and restraint. So it deserves a lot of discussion, I think, even to get to the findings.
Let me start off by saying, let's separate the two. Seclusion is
Yeah.
placing a kid alone in a room. And there are all sorts of requirements in statute.
So it's
for
not
it.
necessarily alone.
Yes.
Well, it is, I think.
It's
by
not.
definition,
It's not.
No.
It's away from their.
It's their inability to leave.
They can't
Right.
leave the room.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think that's the problem.
this
I
definition.
think one of the problems that we have is how the state and how districts look at escorts, exclusion, like depending where you are, someone says it's an exclusion, it's an escort. That's a big
It's a restraint.
restraint or escort, you know what I mean? Like anytime, I think sometimes we're trying to stop somebody from running outside the building. If one district calls, might call it one thing, while another district could call it something else. It's not, depending on who the teacher is and who doesn't. That's why some numbers are off. And I think that's different than what you're talking about, putting somebody in a padded room or off to the side that way. But if someone's a runner and we get in front of them, what is it?
Well, I think the definitional issues are enormous in this area.
Yeah.
As between what's a seclusion and what's a timeout, as between what's a restraint and what's not a restraint. Statute's got lots of words about that, and I think it just confuses the issue.
Well, it sounds like he's also saying, sorry,
No, go ahead.
hi, Brian.
Hi.
It sounds like he's also saying like, maybe it's unfair to districts that are keeping their data as accurate as possible, and that's kind of the sense I'm getting, that you're
Yes.
saying,
I
yeah.
think it-
I mean, I think hopefully
Depending on
everybody's keeping their data accurate. I said, hopefully everybody's keeping their.
I don't
data
think you're not
accurate.
keeping accurate. I think the bigger you are,
Maybe
the
not
more
first.
spots they,
Yeah.
people you have, and who's not trained, and what's the exact language, and what's, what it account, it could be different.
Well, we see
Yeah.
wide variance in data between
Right.
districts and wide data, which I don't think is explained by different practices. I think it's explained by different definitions.
That's why I don't disagree with that.
What do you think, Brian?
Well, I think definitions is trainable and clear, like, I think our definitions are what they are, they're clear, we have training on that, so that's a training issue. Data collection is a separate issue, and emergency procedures is a third issue. So it's hard to talk across all three.
And before we get too far into this conversation, because I know it's gonna be a loaded conversation, I know earlier on, I believe we talked about convening kind of a working group that is inclusive of more people than the members of this task force to really kind of dive in before we make recommendations, because I think this is a very multifaceted issue, and I know people have very strong feelings about it on either side of it. But I think the reality is, the language in this paragraph is concerning to me in a variety of places. But I do think there are people that are not at this table that need to weigh in.
One of those groups I would suggest is, parents of kids who need to be restrained or secluded for safety. Because I think nobody wants to restrain or seclude kids ever. But when you have a student who's 19 years old and hitting her head against the tile floor, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're not allowed to restrain her in school, like literally, what happens?
This-
We call 911 at 6 minutes before the police get, I mean, it's, you know,
Are we on the paragraph where violent behavior occurs?
yes.
Yes.
It is also, there are
I'm just
some
gonna
inaccurate.
Put it out there. Does
Yeah.
anybody feel like this paragraph should stay?
Well, I think we have to deal with the issue of restraints. of course.
That's not what I asked though.
No, it's like, as it now stands, it's not.
Yeah, I'm just putting it out there. If anyone else feels that this paragraph should stay or any part of it as presented.
No.
Okay, so why don't we agree to take it out instead of wasting time on it, wordsmithing it, and then continue our conversation.
Yeah, and I will just say that seclusion is permitted, not as part of the IEP, but in response to emergency situations. So similar to restraint and has the same kind of documentation requirements as restraint.
I also like the idea, that you presented for Heather. But I like that idea of having, the task force meet with, a focus group.
Yeah.
Other,
Mhm.
people. That could be a finding.
Yes,
Before
that
we
would be
move
great to go further. in this
The
area.
recommendation.
Because during this, I know you keep wanting to know. go ahead.
Well, you-
Cause I like turned my back and I was like.
My special department said, when they saw that,
Yeah.
they just asked me to, study years ago, so I'm after you.
No, no, okay, just because I was on, all those different, people were giving their testimony for the very impactful, conversation about concerning this, and especially around the younger kids. That's where I heard a lot of parents were, you know, it was heartbreaking to listen to. As a person who works with 18 through 22-year-old large men, I know that there's a difference, so we have to have that conversation. There's a total difference between why they're in my school and not in the regular ed, right, as that age too, because we do need somehow to protect themselves, the staff, anybody else around them, the other kids. There is something what we're doing, and we, like I said, I keep saying, we have the training, so that helps. You know, we have the facilities, that helps. Not everybody has it, so I'm sure I'm gonna jump in 100 more times. Your turn, thank you.
But it's the same thing, there's some kids that even at 12 and 13,
Yeah.
that are bigger than our staff and stronger than our staff, that hurt in themselves, that we didn't have any seclusions restraints. Our staff say that we couldn't handle them, and they're not
Makes a
sure,
significant
that went out everywhere, they're not sure all places they
Yeah.
could either.
Okay.
They said, just be careful, like, there's those cases you hear everybody's really sad about, but then there's cases of kids that are really like out of control, that they're doing the best they can, but they need some kind of mechanism to keep them safe and their staff safe. Until, like you said, until the ambulance could come or somebody could come. And there's not a lot of them, but they're saying if you took it totally out, like, what do you do in the 6 or 8 minutes until we call 911? Or the police come, you know what I mean?
Until they get to do something. Some places the police will do nothing.
They don't, they don't want it. So they just said, be careful, say you never do.
So should our finding be what, something along the lines of what Heather proposed and you backed, Fran, that we would like to convene like a subcommittee within the committee to look at this issue more deeply.
Yeah,
Convene a focus group, convene a focus
Yes.
group.
I think.
So maybe for example,
Further
a
look at-
focus,
yes,
so there might be
exactly.
other things.
That's a good
It's not
idea.
about what we're looking for too, so we're looking
Yeah.
to look at definitions, we're looking to look at data, we're looking to look at maybe something specific that's developmentally appropriate or physically appropriate for different age groups. We're making sure that we include, you know, parents and people with experience. We can probably that group should comb the testimony and see who would be great to invite.
I just wonder what we're gonna get out of that. We're gonna get a repeat of the hearings where there are people on both sides. And that's, I'm not, you know, I don't know how that's gonna advance the ball for us. Let me ask the more general question. Look, we have a whole array of laws dealing with restraint and seclusion in Connecticut now. Are they working? Do they need to be changed?
I think one of the things that comes up every year, Andy, when this gets revisited by the legislature, especially coming from a specialized program, knowing what the implications would be if we had an inability to use restraint and seclusion and what the outcomes for those kids would be. I know seclusion becomes more controversial, because of kind of this concept that's presented in this, which is really far from what seclusion actually is, in my opinion. And there are, you know, I think part of this is it needs to go back to an individualized approach to the student. There are kids where it's clinically indicated that a seclusion is much more appropriate than a physical restraint because of sexual abuse history, because they're reinforced by physical touch. There's lots of reasons why you might misuse a seclusion to get a behavior to decrease faster than if we're restraining kids. And that's not for every kid, that's for a small percentage of kids, but by precluding it and not having that as an option, which I know is, you know, what a lot of people are trying to move towards. And I think when we go to the legislature and we hear the compelling stories, part of that is inappropriate staff behavior sometimes when a kid is injured. And like, we can want to legislate or write language all we want around staff behavior, but the reality is we don't want to take away interventions that are effective at reducing behavior. And I think that's one of the two most important things is how do we keep kids safe so we can educate them in our state? And two is how do we improve the behavioral outcomes and thereby reduce? And I think we've put a lot of things in place in the last several years around more frequent revisiting IEPs when we're seeing a lot of restraints or seclusions. Or, you know, and so I do think there's mechanisms in place. I think it's become a burdensome process for both districts and schools around the frequency with which we meet. And every time it goes back to the legislator, we revisit that around more documentation. And I wonder if the more we pile on, is it actually improving anything?
Right.
Catherine?
It's getting in the way.
I think from the parent perspective, it feels like there's no recourse if you disagree with how the school's handling something. So let's just assume the worst case scenario that a staff member is being inappropriate. So if someone calls me and they say they think something was handled or inappropriately, or somebody is not trained properly, or whoever, you know, assume it is that kind of situation, what does a parent do? They can go all the way to a filing, you know, for due process or administrative complaint in the SDE. The clients I work with have no ability to do that without support, right? And I'm generalizing. So what do? They call DCF, they think it was handled inappropriately. DCF's not really gonna do anything. The worst case, if they think something is criminal, they would file a police report. So that's all very unsatisfactory and not helpful, really. Like, I mean, that's what you're supposed to do as it stands now. I wish there was a way, Brian Blackears, I wish there was a way that like there could be some sort of review process or some sort of specific type of complaint or investigation that could be reviewed by SDE. If a family thought something happened, you know, something happened inappropriately or outside of the bounds what we're talking about right now. So I'm just putting that out there. It's probably not gonna be popular, but I think if you're a parent in that situation, you feel like you have very little recourse.
So I don't disagree with you. I think that there is, something to say about that. I would just caution because if there's a review process in place, the emotionality of parents in, like, there could be bigger issue, you know what I mean? Like.
Well, there's a lot of factors. I agree. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's simple, and I know parents
It's
are gonna
not.
be reactive, and this is a very emotional area for a parent, understandably. But I also think that right now, there's no good mechanism. So a
Right.
parent is not gonna feel hurt, and it really only escalates things.
Yeah, so That's a really good point.
And
I
I'll
think
say
that-
we get a lot of calls about that, a lot recently, actually, one of my colleagues asked for help and
Yeah.
2 days apart got two 6 and 7-year-old kids, 4-person holds. And it was multiple times in a month, so they had their PPTs, and for one of them, a police officer was involved in both of them. So those parents are calling us and they're asking, you know, what can we do next? And it's not an uncommon call that we're getting. And sometimes it isn't clear, but I've been able to, call Sean at the Bureau who handles that, and, you know, he's been able to help with some of the, intricacies of it, you know, but in general,
But that's
it
not
can
a
be
defined
really-
process, that's because you.
it
right.
could be really confusing, and there's no clear cut way for people. We even get calls from non-special ed families, who have been in the same situation, and they want to know what they can do about it.
I think
We had a case this year of a 10-minute prone restraint. Of a kid, and so again, we did all the things you're supposed to do. I'm sorry, I'm shouting.
No.
She's like, what? We did all the things we're supposed to do, like. Was it really resolved? No, I mean, at the end of the day, like the parent asks to see a camera, you know, all this stuff, and so. That's not the road anyone wants to be on. So I just feel like if there was a way that, if there was someone who specializes at the State Department of Ed that could take that in and really kind of review, and I'm not saying the parent's gonna get the answer they want, but at least it's somebody who's trained in looking at that, okay, is there something that could have been done better differently next time? I think that would really answer parents, and meet them where they're at.
So we have consensus, I believe, on a task force, having a focus group.
I'm not sure I'm gonna with you on that. I just don't, I think the task force is gonna hear exactly the same testimony the legislature heard, and we're gonna be in exactly the same position afterwards.
I think to answer your original question though, Andy, I believe Connecticut has one of the best, most stringent restraint and seclusion laws in the country. I don't think it's re-looking at the law.
Well,
It
that's
sounds
the
like it's more looking at, you know, the practice and the data reporting, and I do like your idea of maybe some avenue for parents to have an outside opinion of what's going on, if there is something
If
that's
it's a
of
specialized
concern.
person, yeah, you could really take a look at that.
But a focus on de-escalation may be something that we could recommend, because that would handle a lot with the staff issues of what de-escalation strategies did you put in place beforehand? Or something to that effect, that maybe we say that they need to be trained in restraint and seclusion, but maybe the focus has to be, they need to be trained in de-escalation as well as restraint and seclusion. Because the models of restraint out there, some lie heavily on the de-escalation piece and a little bit on the restraint, and some are very restraint based with a little touch on de-escalation. So maybe it's, we need to recommend or find that there needs to be more training in the de-escalation proactive strategies before we get onto the hands.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, just a quick comment. There is already a group that meets with the adult agencies led by DSS. I think CAPS Up is a part of that, or we've mentioned it. but
Yeah.
About having
Mhm.
CAPS Up included and CONCASE and so
Mhm.
forth, but the group is about reducing the restraints and seclusion across the state through training, through technical assistance and professional development. So
That'd be perfect.
that's a group already in existence that we could reinforce, and maybe they need to meet more frequently. Maybe we need to look at, practices and guidance and other, regulatory activities that the state can do to help support that. Because I think all of our goals are to reduce,
Right.
but a complete removal may have the adverse effect of what we're trying to accomplish.
There's gonna be parents that can't send their kids to school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a piece of that we're missing is the debrief afterwards,
Mhm.
where it kind of speaks to what
Correct.
happens. And how do we bring this back? What can we do different next time? Which
Correct.
sometimes gets missed in all the paperwork you fill out,
Mhm.
right? And you're trying to get that done, you're trying to get through it and get back to the classroom.
And the debrief is just as important
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
staff as it is for the
Mhm.
family
Oh,
and the
definitely.
child,
Yep.
right? All three.
Well, there's a consensus around the fact
Mm-hmm.
that the law is okay the way it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it serves as a model for
Yeah,
other states.
It really does.
That would be, I mean, I don't agree with you, those top, maybe the top third of states in the situation. depends on how you look at it, but in any case, it is better than most. The second issue is, you know, the definitional issue, which, Brian asserts the definitions are perfectly clear and it's a matter of trading. That explains the differentiation, the differences in reporting are profound. And I think they don't reflect, what actually happens. And so that's an area which we might want to, look at. And then, you know, this whole area that Catherine brought up of responding to parents. Now, it occurs to me that the new universal complaint form being adopted now by the SEL Collaborative allows for parent complaints about constrained seclusion. But
Well, I also think that we need to honor what Heather brought to the table too, which was a focus group on, from practitioners, correct?
I think it depends on where we're going and what we want our recommendation to be. Like if what we're doing is trying to recommend whether the law is appropriate or not, or whether we're recommending changes. Like, I think that's what we have to get clear on, and that can inform whether a focus group is, like, we've all heard the testimonies around, you know, why it's necessary and why it's not necessary. And when I think of a focus group, I think of it more from let's say we didn't have restraint seclusion, what would happen in the state of Connecticut? Like, what would be the impact? What are the challenges that programs and districts are facing? What are the challenges that parents are facing? Like, I don't think any educators out there looking to hurt a student in a restraint seclusion. I think we all agree on that. And how do we then put the foundational needs in place so that we can successfully have this as an intervention in our tool belt to be able to keep kids in district and keep kids in the state of Connecticut? Because for some of our most impacted kids, they're going out of state if we don't have these interventions.
And they'll probably be restrained and secluded.
But of course,
Yes.
yeah.
So I could see a focus group.
well, you see, look, you know, you can have a focus group of practitioners, and Catherine and I can put together a focus group of parents that would come up with exactly the opposite conclusion.
And maybe
What
some
about focus
parents
group of both?
and
Yeah,
parents that wouldn't come to the.
Understanding.
I-
Testimony is very different from a
Yes.
focus group where people around a table can share, this is the parent concern, this is the practitioner perspective. What might be different, and maybe it's a required debrief to make sure
Yeah.
that's part of the process. So the parent at least understands what in the moment that practitioner was thinking when they took the action they took.
I will say, you know, as a school that has many kids with dysregulated behavior, and a very, very high staffing, so most students are one-to-one staffed. It is a lot of work. I mean, it takes a lot of time. And our focus this year has been on really improving our ability to do the debrief, because it is really important. It often is in the hallway as people are passing, because we just don't have enough time. But it is really important, and so we're working on developing tools that we can get some information right away. So to do it right and to do it well does take a big investment in terms of, you know, like, this is what we're gonna spend our PD on, and it's worth it. And, you know, talking about whether the law has worked, you know, I remember when the law came out about you couldn't be in seclusion or restraint for 15 minutes or more without approval. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be running around the school all the time. And so it forced us to say, what are we doing that could be better? What else do we need to learn about? And so I think the law has been really, really helpful in that. You know, one of the things that I do miss is there was that consortium of 11 state agencies, not just state agencies, I don't think, and there was an annual conference on seclusion and restraint. Colleen was around. I thought those were really helpful, and to hear some of the success stories. I think you actually presented as a director. Yeah. You know, I think just any opportunity for learning and for sharing, and you know, Brian and I have talked about, you know, could we put together a group, and CAPSF is looking at doing the same thing, where, you know, a team of professionals review a case study, you know, because we do have a student who has high level of restraint because she has a very high level of self-injury. I would love to get around a table with people from different disciplines and different perspectives and so would her parents, by the way, and they would
Well,
be
it's
very
like a
happy to
case
be.
study,
Right,
kind of like
exactly.
review, like help
Right,
us.
right, so could, anyway, those are just
Mhm.
some of my thoughts.
So I really like what Patrice said, because we're talking about, I mean, staff, I'm sure feels trauma in that situation. They need to debrief to talk it through and process, and also think about next time and all that stuff, prevention. And again, family's never part of that. And it's, highly traumatic to a family to hear what happened to their child, and it sets up a dynamic, like just on its face. Like, it's very hard to surmount that dynamic of somebody was physical with my child today. I don't know how or why or what. You have to have a very strong amount of trust in the people who are working with your child, which many people do, and many people also don't. So I think that is such a delicate situation that, of course, we're gonna hear, the most amount of conflict around this. And so I don't wanna end the conversation with like whether we do it or not. Like, I think advocates, including myself, would obviously want it a certain way, but like, short of banning it altogether, we need to think about what are our goals here. Obviously, reducing it, obviously doing so with the most thoughtful, trained people, and making sure that families are part of this conversation and feel heard and have recourse if they're concerned that it was one of those most terrible situations. Like, we have to have an answer for those most terrible situations, even if we know if they're rare and we don't want them to occur and we're trying to prevent them. Like, there's still not good recourse, that can answer to that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with having, follow-up and more people involved in this. Is that consensus?
Well,
Right.
Sorry, we're freezing, so we're just putting our parka on.
Are you cold?
They're distracted.
No, I'm very cold. I'm a sensitive.
I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry.
How about we take a 10-minute break? All right, and I'll adjust it if I can.
I also walk around sweating all the time.
No.
You gotta take a time. Should we mute the owl? Should we mute it? For the 10-minute break?
Oh, yeah.
It is 66 degrees.
what,
It's, yeah, my husband does that too.
It's keeping us awake.
It's kind of too much on.
you gotta,
Thanks, Jen. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
good work.
I promise.
Hit this place on.
Don't work, like, I don't work with those kids. We are so.
Nice to see you.
Because I
I don't think we've met.
Really, like, you guys are out of control. You guys are something.
Well, the rest of
Right, right on the street.
Four daughters.
We have to get her
Practice my.
Okay, we're gonna reconvene. Okay, so on behavior,
Well, I think there are two things we can agree on.
Okay, let's hear it.
For the whole day.
All right, wait for it, everybody.
One is that the current law is okay. And two is that because of the really wide diversity of reporting, that we probably need more training in terms of definitions and reporting restraint solutions.
Is it training? Is it also compliance? Review, monitoring?
They already.
Well, I don't know, I mean, it's,
Are you really training on definitions?
training over.
It is, I mean, it's
It's
part
more
of it.
interpreting,
It's
yeah.
definitely part of it.
Yeah.
Breaking it down.
And beyond that, I think, you know, it's still open now, and in terms of the PMT training, which Amy was talking about. I hear from PMT trainers that 95% of what they train is de-escalation, and only 5% is restraint solution.
Yeah.
So
I
I'm
wouldn't
not
say,
sure it's
I wouldn't say it's that high.
I wouldn't either.
But we use PMT in our program and we have 2 trainers and a coach. And it is very heavily, you know, about prevention and teaching how to set up the environment to prevent all of that. But, it's very rigorous in going over all the holds, the escorts, the transports, the differences, you know, and then, in addition, what PMT doesn't do that we by law have to do is the training on, medical distress, monitoring for medical distress, and then also the laws, we train for the laws too, which PMT by itself doesn't cover.
do we need to make any findings in relationship to that training?
I think there's,
There are
PMT
others.
is one of many vendors.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
We're back to that, though,
CPI.
not wanting to.
Yeah.
There's handle
We're
of
moving-
care, there's
Handle of care,
API,
We're using safety care quite a more and more.
safety care is another one.
okay,
So that,
I don't think.
remember, you're going to see this findings report.
yeah,
Thankfully, Andy's gonna, write it up and we'll totally review every single, finding that's there, as we move forward.
well, the next issue was the one Catherine raised, which we wanted to see whether we're ready to make a finding on, which is, again, need to, I don't, how would you describe it, Catherine?
Monitoring and enforcement?
Well,
I mean-
but she was talking about actual mechanism for parents. to,
It's in that category. Idealistically, right, like that there is a channel directly for parents to, for lack of a better term, complain if they think a restraint or seclusion has been done improperly, inappropriately, whatever, to SDE, to somebody who is specifically tasked with that and knows, I mean, you have to know about how this works, right? From that perspective, and so that they can do some kind of review. And they can make some of their own findings and have to sit back down with the school team and say, you know, come up with something. Okay, this was done properly in this way, but improperly in this way, and of course, I'm not. It's only be as good as it can be for a person outside the situation, like I understand that, but
So
I-
maybe the finding is, there needs to be a mechanism for families to communicate concerns regarding, their child.
directly to SDE, but like.
Wait,
Yeah.
stop where Amy stopped first. As, you know, I think. I think that, to go into that extent is probably maybe something we could agree on. To be a mechanism where parents,
Can communicate.
That's what I'm saying, I'm just saying, I don't want
Well-
to say, we already have due process and this and that. It has to be something specific to my request, something specific to this exact situation, so, you know, seclusion or restraint. We already have all the other mechanisms.
my other concern about this is. At least for my non-verbal clients, I don't think parents are informed about a lot of restraints and seclusions.
But then you're getting back to the law and enforcement. of what-
Yeah, that makes,
That's an
right,
enforcement issue, yeah.
that's,
The
a-
paperwork has to be
Yeah.
done and split, and it goes into the
CT
CT.
yes.
But what is the communication required with the parent? We already established we're gonna
24 hours.
debrief, but what is the communication?
There's the law says 24 hours.
Told within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Verbally or in writing.
Verbally, and then they get a paper.
Supposed to be.
Right.
But it's sent home sometimes in a backpack and sometimes that doesn't reach the parent.
I don't think that's that.
No, it's, he says that, right?
I
Yes,
think it
yes.
specifically says
Oh.
it can go home in a child's bag.
We
Sorry?
do what the parent asks.
But
If
it
the parent says send it home that way, we send it. home. Sometimes we
That
mail
I
it.
can send it home in the student's bag.
Email.
Email,
them.
yeah.
An email.
Well, oh, yeah, we've always called them first.
That doesn't. I would say the communication is, how do we shore that up?
That same day.
Oh,
Send home.
And I
think it
was
says send home.
example, when the child was at the school nurse that day because they got sick, you usually are notified that same day, not 24 hours later.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because how do you as a parent, when your child comes home, how do you talk to them if you don't know anything happened?
Particularly if the child's nonverbal.
Especially if the child is nonverbal.
And the child's gonna give you an account and you're gonna act on that, like you're not gonna have the whole picture. Which also is gonna cause complaint, concern, et cetera.
No, why don't you,
Yeah, what?
put out some language here and see whether we can get reach consensus on
Just write
that.
down what it is.
I mean, I think what Amy said is something we categorize. Going, and the question is, can we go beyond that in any way? I mean, I do think the enforcement issue is, yeah, is a big issue, but,
I think the message is we have to treat this as a special situation. It is a very critical, delicate situation. And we don't treat it as like, okay, we know that too many seclusions or restraints very often indicates the program might not be correct. Not always, but very often, right? So we already have all the ways to complain about that, right? So I think this should be treated as just a carve out, a specific carve out, and it's so important that we have a direct line to STE, and some kind of process in place. Write that down.
It got
Put it out there.
It was recorded.
is there
I
consensus
just wonder if
around the
that's
notion
manageable
of,
for the
of,
SE.
of exploring the idea of creating a position in SDE to review?
well, it would be more than one position.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying. I don't know.
If we would, yeah, I mean, we have a position now.
But it's not
But-
reviewing individual cases though.
Well, again, complaints can be filed. I know this is, we're asking for specific, but we have to think about the mechanism
manageability.
in a way that is manageable and,
What's the outcome?
I mean, we would need a team of people to go out and do these investigations
Who have expertise.
or have expertise in that area.
Right.
And what would the ultimate outcome be? Because you're talking about too, and potentially enforcement and, corrective actions for the individuals.
Mhm.
But the first step should be working with the school and the team,
And parent.
and the parent. And then I'm saying for the parent to work, it's like a tiered approach where if that doesn't work, then there's another mechanism to be able to intervene. We still can do that, but
No, it's a big lift, I know.
yeah,
But doesn't the State Department have access to all of them in CP sets now? So you don't necessarily have to go to district. So if we increase monitoring of the actual reports and read them when it's not a serious injury, we could, we could see opportunities to intervene sooner. I think monitoring and accountability rather than enforcement rate is kind of or a way to approach it. And
Like using, like almost like a data analysis, like what's the data?
yeah, but so like, you guys have
Individualized
those, what are they called? Like you guys pop in the district, whatever. I think it should be.
Unannounced.
But it should be targeted. You're getting a lot of restraint reports from this district. They have high rates. You can do not a random audit, but you're gonna audit there.
But that's a little different. I
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
disagree with
that's
that, but that's no
that's
different.
monitoring versus enforcement, which is
Mhm.
important too, and then. You know, there's only so much we can see from the paperwork, the paperwork may or may not be accurate,
And I
but to
think that was the
investigate.
first point of today,
whether
right?
or
Maybe
not-
the paperwork isn't telling the correct
Yeah.
story.
But
Whether or
that's-
not a restraint should have happened
Yeah.
is an investigation that takes time and facts and,
Right.
Yeah,
you know, a conclusion that
Interviews.
someone's not happy with, you know.
Right.
yeah,
In our complaint process, usually someone's not happy with it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you don't do it and it's not as important, but it's, you know, it would take a team. We have a lot of restraints in our state and seclusions that occur.
Mhm.
And any one of those on any given time could be sent to us if there was some type of mechanism.
but like, that's kind of the same thing for any person who's unhappy with their kids' program. Any
Right,
one of them could complain to you at any given time.
sure.
So,
But the seriousness of the issue,
Right.
I agree, needs some type of specialized attention
Yeah.
in some way, but there would definitely be a capacity issue for us based on our current structure.
yeah, no, and this sounds like a multi-year effort to do it
Yeah.
thoughtfully, but I think we can still, I would suggest we could still put it in as a recommendation that we're moving towards, not to implement.
And what's,
And
and if the SDE, if this crack came at SDE found that the restraint was inappropriate, what are they supposed to do about that?
We would do training,
Right, they do all the training,
information,
yeah.
technical
Like
assistance,
you do complaints now, yeah.
you know, some type of policy, you know, review of policies and things of that nature. We can keep more regular contact. Those are some
Maybe-
things outside of, you know, punitive for the individuals,
Right.
which we'd have to work with the school districts on and the unions, I'm sure.
I think speaking from a school district perspective, maybe it makes more sense to start this at the district level, because as a director, I never know what's going on in my 12 schools at the same time, right? So maybe it's just an ARC role, if that's a real word or not, I just made up. Process of a parent there's some type of mechanism for a parent to go directly to the district leadership, and then if they don't feel the district leadership has addressed their concern, then they can go, so it's not
Makes
all
sense.
going directly to the state.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of like
No, I like the idea, I think, again, it's just,
because sometimes when I
there's
find
general
out,
bias, right?
right, but sometimes knowledge is power, right? So if I knew that a parent was concerned about something, I can meet with that parent, have a conversation and do my own investigation.
Yeah.
To see if things went, and then I could explain or at least have proactive communication. And then it goes to the state, and then I'll have more knowledge when it gets to the state of what, it may help the process.
Mhm.
I get where you're coming
Yeah.
from, but I do think in terms of what, I don't think the SDE can manage 162 districts plus all of the private schools with the number of restraints that occur on any given day. To have parents going directly to them without some type of.
Yeah.
It's always a hierarchy.
Well, the
Middle-
hierarchy would stop some of those from going to the SDE to begin with, if they're handled.
You always wanna
locally.
have that relationship with your parents.
Yeah, no, I think
you know?
that sounds ideal, I mean, I'm a little obviously jaded in certain ways, and like, right now, to give an example, right now, I'm currently seeing, right, the bullying complaint process, when I'm filing these complaints, and I'll write 16 different complaints, time, dates, people, everything, and not one is verified. Because it's all internal, and the person investigating is in the school, so again, that's a not good parallel, but like,
No, I
It's a-
understand.
it's a big problem. If it goes the way you're saying, I think that's perfectly reasonable, and we just have to I think we have to have a lot of language around why this has to be carved out, and it's so important and so critical that it matters this much, and that's serious.
And I would say even the same for the private schools, right? So if I had a family that was concerned about what was occurring to their child in a private school, if they came to me or to the director, then the director could have a conversation or at least look into what's happening at the private school, right? Because we're paying for it.
Yeah.
And we should know,
Yeah.
and we're very removed from the day-to-day occurrences there. So I think that might be a middle ground to address your
Yeah.
concern, because I think it is a very valid concern.
Mhm.
But then to also address, I don't think the SD could handle it
Yeah.
going directly straight to them.
So,
And we don't want to build a divide between the relationship, because the relationship between the district and the parent is paramount,
But
right?
it's probably already divided, I guess.
Go ahead.
But I hear what you're saying, the
Just-
first step.
Yeah, there is a process in place for students who have serious injuries who meet that criteria, so we could look at that too. I know that's not necessarily parent to, but that's another mechanism that we have in place. It goes to the Office of Disability Rights Connecticut and copied on that, so they get to review and view the report and they may independently intervene, but
I think
there's
also
many
the-
more that are not serious injuries that may have happened inappropriately.
And we also have to differentiate from like the more egregious cases that would really be a DCF call. If they're constituting abuse and neglect, you know, in more extreme cases.
Correct.
From this other reporting mechanism, yeah.
So can you, craft some language around that and send it to Andy and?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And we'll argue about it at the next meeting.
Well, I think we're pretty close to consensus
I
on this
do,
one, and
yeah.
yes, on those, so we have 3 points about restraint and exclusion. Law's okay, no strong with that. 2, that we need, you know, training on, definitions for purposes of reporting to create consistency in reporting of that. And 3, that we need some parent complaint mechanism, initially going to, the district.
Well, a tiered mechanism for triggering a response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tiered mechanism.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if there's any thought, the law's okay, the training, the parent, is there any thought, I hate to keep going back to Heather, but I'm thinking of,
We like Heather.
We like going back to Heather.
I'm thinking of a group of people just coming together to inform us, can we be better at it?
Yeah.
Can we have a better way of doing it and bringing others together to talk about what could be better, I think is a viable, finding for this group. What do you think?
I think if there's anytime you have a focus group, if there's a purpose and for the focus group to come together, we have questions, you know, it's really a data gathering process. It's not just like come share, you know, then I think it could be very meaningful.
Yeah, I do, I think so. Now,
Yeah, exactly,
Like, this is what required as an
Yes.
issue, and now,
Right.
okay, this is
It
what
has
we're
a
moving
purpose,
towards.
exactly.
And if you can give us more input on
Right.
how it looks for you or looks for
Right.
you.
We would have structure and
I
questions
think
we
it-
want information on and.
absolutely. It also brings more credence to the fact that we know this is an important
Yes.
issue.
Yeah.
And we
Yes.
know that
Yes.
this is an issue
Yes.
that's bothering many.
Yes,
And so we want to investigate all parts of it.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay? You okay with that? Anybody opposed?
Well, I mean, I just don't think it's gonna advance the ball very much.
Oh.
That's okay, I'm glad to do it. I'm glad to have more participation. I don't think, you know, we're gonna read, you know, we do have 3 things that we seem to have some level of agreement on. I don't think that, you know, hearing all the same arguments from all the same people again is gonna.
It's not arguments, we're gonna have focus to it.
Okay.
I think you're saying if there's some really well-researched reports by OCA, like, there's recommendations from the SAC, there's a couple different pretty recent reports and recommendations, so, and we could review those, but.
Well, I mean, I think there's that, but there's also, you know, very strong views of like Suzanne Latzo, who was one of the ones who said she would close her schools if we began restraint exclusion.
What's their school?
Milestone.
There's, you know, there's the various trainers on restraint exclusion, who have a lot to add to this discussion. I think there's certainly a lot of information out there, but I don't, you know, I think it could add some descriptive language to our finding eventually, but I don't know that it's gonna change anybody's minds about where we should go with this.
And I think we have the information we need for findings. I think it would be more around recommendations, but at least in recent years, I feel like the cycle we're in is the legislature proposes changes of language and then we're responding to the proposed changes of language that are written by legislators who are not necessarily in schools. Whereas where I think a task force might be able to helpful is to really kind of look at current practice. We can make recommendations on, would there be things that would be helpful to change? And then be recommending potential changes or things that can improve versus reacting to somebody else writing language that we have to then implement in schools.
But Heather, this is exactly the model here. The legislature got testimony restraint exclusion and said, we're gonna appoint this task force under Fran Rabinowitz to decide this issue. And, you know, I don't want us in a position of saying, okay, we're not gonna decide the issue, we're gonna create another task force to decide the issue for us.
No, we're not.
No, we're not doing that, I
I'm
don't
not
think.
looking to do that.
I wonder if there's any value, Brian, if you have any colleagues at other state directors that you think would have some good information to share, either from past experience, of banning seclusion and restraint, or what that experience was like, or states that you feel, you know, those colleagues that their state is doing a really good job and might have information to share with us.
Absolutely.
Might be good to look outside Connecticut, a little more nationally.
Yeah. There are
So-
states who have gone through the process.
Yeah.
Anything else on behavior?
Well, no, exclusionary discipline, so that's even bigger.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, goodness, we've only accomplished a page.
Yeah, we've only done.
Put the front back together.
So now we're on to
And it's a lot.
which, by the way, Andy and I are on the JPOC committee, which has been talking about suspension and expulsion.
And the discipline collaborative.
Yes,
too, and
the
all that.
discipline collaborative.
Hey, Catherine
What?
and Catherine.
Okay, you're
I'm
on.
gonna
the
put
list.
the fight up.
Let me just state my views on this, which is, you know, I think the strongest support of schools is feeling of belonging. And telling a kid that he doesn't belong, get out of here, we're kicking you out, is just the wrong approach. And so I would rather have a system where instead of excluding that kid, we hug the kid, we provide support and services, which we do now. For virtually every expelled kid. And so I would so in many ways, all I really would like to do is eliminate the term expulsion and out of school suspension. And talk about instead, taking a kid who could not be in the regular classroom, who poses a disruption, a danger. Taking that kid and putting him in, you know, a therapeutic program in school, and that we recommend funding of those sorts of programs. So instead of saying we're kicking you out, instead we're saying, we know you've got issues and we're providing services for those issues. That's the model in my mind of where we should go in on this. And I think the notion of saying we're throwing you out of school serves, does not serve the purpose for that kid. It doesn't serve much of a purpose for the school, the educational system, and it's frankly abdicating our responsibility to educate our kids. That's my view of that.
Do we have data? I'm sure we do have data on the
Oh, it's
number of
there.
special ed students who are expelled.
Oh, yeah.
By disability category.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just one, right?
I don't mean this in any type of disrespectful way, but I thought, wasn't one of our earlier meetings, we said we were not going to address discipline and exclusionary because there were other structures. It doesn't mean we can't, but. And then the second piece of this is I think we should really focus on special education, not the concept of exclusionary discipline within that context. So a couple of things come to mind, manifestation determination, which is part of the regulatory process for special education students. Is that process working? What are the issues with that process? Can we focus maybe on that rather than the overall concept for this purpose,
Okay.
given that? But, I mean.
I just haven't checked my views.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an important topic and it does disproportionately affect students with disabilities. So, anyway.
I love that idea, and we had talked about this, I know in years past, Brian, manifestation determination. Notice and understanding the parents, they do, I know generally. The parents I work with do not understand what is at stake for manifestation determinations. Very, very rarely, it's confusing for anybody. So if we had a better notice process for what it is and what it's for,
How to prepare for it.
There are still districts that ask the wrong questions, like, does your child know right from wrong? He knew what he was doing, that kind of analysis, faulty analysis. So if parents can really understand what the point of the meeting is in advance, and understand how to organize themselves for it, I think that'd be hugely helpful.
The other thing we have going for us is that there's very recent guidance at the federal level on this topic.
Correct.
And it's a priority for the Secretary of Education, so I mean, there's.
The problem with all that is the timing. I mean, the manifestation determination has to be done almost instantly.
Yeah, but notice, because I mean, that's easy enough to do.
And.
A parent-friendly guide, like a
I was just
parent-friendly
gonna say a
3
parent's guide,
pages,
manifestation.
that could, we could write that
Yeah.
in our time together. I mean,
So better understanding for parents about manifestation.
I think I would say required, you know, a guide that I'd be happy to partner with and,
Similar to the guide you get when you show up to any PPT.
but not similar at all.
Well, no, not similar, no, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
in
Same
terms
kind of-
of,
same
in terms of
concept.
process of
Yeah.
making sure you receive it, you
Well, when you
receive
get the notice of the
documentation.
meeting, you get that attached to it, 3
Right,
pages, that's what
yeah.
a manifestation is.
Mhm,
I mean, that's, we could do that, that's
We could
easy
do
to
that.
execute.
mhm.
Okay.
So,
I have another thing. I know we're studying it and making recommendations in other places, but I don't think it hurts to say that more resources are needed for therapeutic settings and interventions because it adversely affects students with disabilities. That's all I'm saying. There aren't enough therapeutic settings for these kids, either suspended or expelled.
So are you talking about therapeutic within each school district?
Yes,
No, that doesn't.
I'm thinking of the school district, I'm thinking of, where we might have been able to work with kids that, were in school suspension, for example, you know, I don't care what you call it, but where there was more, counseling on, you know, how did you get here? How, you know, why is this happening? And there weren't the resources to provide that, as well as, you know, for me, it was also academic tutoring, for these kids many times that, really needed it. And, you know, the best I could do was have somebody in the room that oversaw the in-school suspension. All I'm saying is, I think it could be a better process if more resources were, available for it.
I gotta say, STE, that guidance STE put out in 17 and what you should do with expelled kids, is really good stuff. It's, you know, but it takes real resources to actually do that.
and that's what Mike McCann recently said is not like, you know, optional. Like, this is real, that guidance came out pursuant to litigation. So I think kind of underscoring that, that's, you know, that's not optional, that it's supposed to be implemented.
Well, okay. The
Mike said it.
district's not have the resources to do it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm
And
just
so
saying.
you know, I think a recommendation about funding resources to provide the therapeutic supports to meet that.
Yeah.
That sort of standard.
I would be
makes
very
sense.
happy with that.
Yeah. Sure, honey.
I would also recommend professional development for school administrators on, this topic as well. I think that's really important. School administrators really get stuck in what are the best things for me to do? What avenues should I take? What are good, positive responses to discipline, you know? I think it's just difficult because they get stuck in that. I want to keep my teachers safe, keep the kids safe, but I also know that I have obligations to the student, especially the little ones, right? There's so many times we have an administrator give us a call, hey, this kid just, you know, did this. My teacher needs to understand that I respect them, him or her, and that this child's gonna get a consequence, but I understand that, you know, how do I manage that? I think that professional development is really key, to go forward in terms of how we can put positive supports in place for students.
The piece of that you're missing though is the pressure from parents.
I agree, right?
That's
So
enormous.
the administrator every day, you know, Johnny's in my class and he's hurting my child. What are you gonna do? What are you doing about Johnny hurting my kid? So then the administrators in this spot, they're like, what can I do? Right? So I think that's a really important, as students continue to struggle more and more, and the behaviors that we see on any given day are more intense, they need help. And we just can't keep saying, well, you're not allowed to do that, so don't do it, because then how do they respond? What do they do? And how do you keep Sally safe, when there are no other options? I do think it's a really big piece of this. If we want to say that we can't expel or we can't suspend, well, what are their other options? Yes, resources for districts to put in supportive, but you also don't want to isolate a 5-year-old.
No.
Right, so, it's easy for us to focus on the older kids because they're easier to program for and to manage. It's those little ones that, are really difficult. And, you know, you have a parent who, it's their first child in school, is this really what public school is? And then that ruins their perception of public school going forward. It's a big picture issue.
My concern is, if you were designing this course, what do you teach them about? I mean, we don't have answers to this question.
We don't, but I think there's a way for us. I don't think because we don't know the answer, we don't say it's something that we need to do, right? I don't know. I know my administrators struggle every single day with this.
Not just your administrator.
Everybody,
All administrators.
all administrators
It's
are
spread
struggling with
thin,
this.
and if
They are.
often if the child's staying in school, they're the one monitoring the child. I mean,
They're the
It's
ones
a
having to
huge-
field all the
it's
phone
made-
calls,
it's,
make the decision, like, it's hard for them. And
Yeah.
a lot of the burnout and stress that we see right now.
Can't be an instructional leader here.
Yeah, how can I be an instructional leader when
You
this is
can't.
what I'm dealing with every day?
The
We
amount
can't
of
ignore
time.
that piece.
Well, I totally agree with the problem. I'm not sure that professional development is the solution.
So maybe we need to investigate solutions to the
Maybe that's
problem,
the
and part of our findings is that this is a problem and we need to investigate that.
Correct.
Has any state ever successfully gotten rid of school expulsion?
Well, yes, our states don't call expulsions, yes.
Okay.
But they don't call it expulsions, but is it called something else?
Oh,
Same, it's the same.
Okay, so
Same
now,
extended somewhere else.
No,
Yeah.
no one's gotten rid of it.
But we're not, go here.
That's, that's, not.
I would. Okay, so we're gonna add something about, you know, the administrator problem, and we're gonna take a look at how to deal with that, which, you know,
What would you do with unlimited money in that situation? I know where to start, but like, in that, say you're at the apex of that triangle and there you are.
Well, you might, if you think about, I was thinking more of like MTSS or PBIS approach, you might put more of your resources in like the tier 1 across your school. And then have intervention for tier 2, not just academic, but behavioral. So sometimes those are as we've said before in this committee, those are the first positions to go.
The only thing and or at least in Meriden, the only time you get suspended as an elementary kid is for violence. So it's violence against another student.
Right.
600 kids in the school, the principal send you home. There's no other option right now, you know what I mean? You hit a kid, you grab them, you stomped on them, you go home for a couple of days, you stab them. Like, we're not suspending for like, most cities aren't for like talking back to the teacher anymore or.
No.
You know, so I think about like, when I know, that's like-
and even if might not go home.
You're right. You hit somebody, like, so I
Did they
think,
really
be
know?
careful saying that you need more PD for principals.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know,
not
it's
thinking, so
PD.
really not sending kids home
And I'm not sure,
unless there's no other option.
well, the numbers are about to come out the next 2 weeks, and there are dramatic increases.
Yeah.
Suspensions and expulsions and all that.
but it's,
Oh.
but we're not saying violence. What's the root of
So
the?
I think one of the things there's no more in-school suspensions in our school, just because the way the state tracks in-school, out-of-school are the same. So we're at the point now to send everybody home. It's not the best for the kids, but that's the way the state tracks it. So we used to have a little bit of therapy and like during the in-school, we'd work with kids to get them back. But when budget gets tight and they count it the same either way, at our point now, we say send them home in our second year.
It's just kind of the same, rule.
Yeah, it is. In-school and out-of-school count as a suspension.
Not on the,
Yeah.
not on the ones that.
They gets reported back to us as a suspension.
Well, boy, that's something we probably ought to make a finding about that.
Because when we get report at the end of the year, they sat them all. So if we keep them on more than 90 minutes,
Maybe to you, but when you look at the data, we can see the difference.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, when we're ranking us against other districts, how many suspensions, we have a Meriden versus Waterbury or somebody else?
Okay, so that, so
The
then. maybe we
suspensions
should
come back to
compare-
us as how many suspensions we have.
But maybe we should compare it properly then, like, because when we see that data that's broken down.
Mhm.
But if you're, if.
We feel that like,
No, I get it.
when we're getting ranked against everybody else, we're
No, I
like,
get
how many
that.
suspensions did we have in our high schools this year? How many suspensions we had in our high school?
Well, in-school suspension with therapeutic support is a good model.
But it doesn't, you know what I mean? I don't disagree, but it doesn't kind of.
He's saying he's disincentivized to do that.
Well, I understand
But we
that,
have
so, and so
fix
that's,
that problem.
that's something we can make a finding about it, if that's the case.
Tell me again, Mike, why it's December?
Because at the end of the year, when we get, our schools, when we get how many suspensions, we're told they're all added together.
It's all added
It's all
together.
added together.
Out of
It's an
school.
exclusion, it's an exclusionary practice for more than 90 minutes. They're saying it's.
Wow.
Yep.
So in terms of, I think in terms of the tiered interventions, if SE's looking at the data and they're saying, who are we breaking down by district that we need to help or prioritize, I think that's how it gets counted.
Well, that should be a finding.
I mean, because we have a therapeutic, we don't have therapeutic assessment, it doesn't help us anyway, so we don't spend resources, we're just like, just go home, secondaries. But if that was something, if we had something in there for them, then we would look at spending money. There's no reason to spend money on it.
I don't oversee that data collection, so I would wanna go back and get information back to everybody about the differentiation and the requirements around the data reporting, which I'm happy to do.
That would be helpful.
It's not just his reporting, it's how they're getting the reporting back. So the boards of ed are getting how they're ranked against other schools. So even if he's reporting ISS and OSS differently, the report that comes back to the Board of Ed and that ranks schools against each other adds both of those up. So if the culminating effect is it doesn't matter with his original reporting, because it's coming back added together anyway.
Well, it's.
Well, I would
more than just
argue,
that,
I
It's
mean-
that tiered system,
I would,
And-
it's
yeah,
that tiered system of rating districts.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it doesn't come back as in school versus,
There's no more benefit for us in school. When we get, at the end of the day, it looks like we're suspending. When we get our reports are like, how many suspensions of different minority groups, it's not like it's better for in school versus out of school, it all counts the same.
wow.
This
That's,
proportionality comes back to us, doesn't matter where they go. Around one of the 90 minutes.
Well, for that purpose, I think, again, we have it available, we can all see it, we can all break it down, and we could even tier the schools just based on that. But if we're reporting, they have the whole monitoring intervention, they put different districts on red or orange or whatever it
Right,
is.
we had to do a report the other day, where disproportionality is bad in minority students, like we were suspending more, it didn't say your in school's less, comes less than your.
Well,
Sending them out.
the tiered chart
it does.
is a requirement of
does.
federal law. And
I'm
so I'm
looking at my
wondering if the
report
federal
right
law
now, it totally
requires that, would say.
But it counts the same, like when we rank everybody, we're seeing it says, you get this many exclusions.
They're ranking it
I
back
don't
as
know what
exclusions,
ranking
not
you're
as
talking
different types of suspensions.
Yeah, so I
Can't
think,
be.
because I'm looking at my report right now, and it's broken down, in-school suspension, 0 to 10 days, in school, 11 or more, out of school expulsion, 0 to 10, more than 11.
But it doesn't, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference, right?
Well,
That's what we're told, like, at least that's what I was told when we did it, like, it doesn't make a difference where the suspensions are, they all
It
matter
makes
the
a
same.
difference to the student.
No, that's what it does across, yeah.
A critical document is that tiered analysis that's put out, which. is-
I'll bring it, I'll send what we have, I'll send it next time.
And my question is whether the federal law, which mandated those tiered analyses, requires an out of school and in school count the same. That's, and that's the question, we can pursue it in G.
Yeah.
What about
And it
you?
goes back to like, what's best for kids,
Mhm.
right? So if. When we're talking about findings, we should probably dig deeper into this to make sure we have the facts straight, because
Exactly.
are we making decisions based on a reporting mechanism, or how are we doing versus what's best for kids? And that does have impact.
yeah, I would say what's best for kids, but I would also say we might have a finding that says we need to break this down.
That's what I mean, right? So like if.
In a better way.
But if we don't have it there for, like, there's not somebody there giving help when they're there, it's just a random body, that it doesn't make a difference anywhere, it's just a silent.
Yeah.
It would have to be our finding, like, something like, when they go to this in school, there's something more than just, somebody sitting there waste of time, don't talk, sit there, do your homework, then you might as well be home.
Then escalate and then-
It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
Right.
then you go home anyway.
Take your phone away for
Yeah.
the day.
Which
Yeah.
goes back to Fran's comment about how we need resources to provide these in-school supports, not led by para-educators for the day, right? What is the education they're getting when they're in an in-school suspension or an out-of-school suspension? What does that look like and how can schools really implement that with fidelity? And that's funded. Because you're not getting a teacher to sit in an ISS room.
Yeah.
Or it's like I said, it's the principal who's, you know, you're sitting.
Or the
there,
kid sitting there, the
learning
kid sitting in a adjacent
office.
conference room, while the
Right.
principal's having
Right,
meetings.
listen,
The secretary is paying attention to
Right.
make sure the kid
Right.
doesn't jump out the window.
yes, or leave.
That is
I
not
would
a
also-
convention.
No, it's not.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
The counselor checks in for a half hour and then the kid knows he's done for the day. That's
So
not it
maybe,
either.
look at, a finding is more resources are needed and based upon what, you show us in terms of data, a differentiation of data that's reported out.
Well, yeah, is the data driving the decisions that,
Hmm?
is the data driving decisions that educators are making? You know, is a reporting mechanism.
One would hope
Well-
not.
I would, that's what I'm saying, but
Yeah,
if
but-
that's the reality, we better
But
look
we
at
can
it
also
again.
agree with the proposition that an in-school suspension with therapeutic support is far preferable.
Far preferable.
Yeah.
We're not-
That would be perfect, right? That's a finding.
Yeah, so
That's a finding, yes.
And there's a recognition that, again, districts are being disincentivized. And also that we know that it is one of the first ones that's being cut. It is staffed by people who have, you know, little to no training. Nothing. I mean, I think the best case scenario, you see those programs staffed by kind of mentor type. So you don't have to, we don't not necessarily for certified teacher people, that's good too, but like, you can have more community people available to staff that kind of room if they can make connections with kids, like that's the primary goal of that room.
And you could have community people that you, work with, train to,
We had that in Bridgeport.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I don't know how deep we want to go on manifestation determinations, but there's a lot of comments I have to make about that. I don't know whether, I mean, the critical thing is the nexus between the behavior and the disability, and a disability. So one issue is whether it counts, whether it's just the primary disability on the IEP or any disability. And I think the law is fairly clear it's any disability, although districts tend to
Yes.
interpret an elderly as the listed disability. That is an issue with a whole bunch of manifestation issues. And secondly, to effectively show a nexus, a parent generally needs an expert. And the time is, you know, is too short to get an expert. Most parents can't afford an expert to establish that. And so, you know, I think, you know, I have enormous problems with manifestation procedure the way it's now implemented. And so,
Well,
yeah,
What paragraph?
The
are
only
you
thing I
in?
would say,
we're not, we need this.
You're freestyling
Yeah.
right now.
This is something I.
Okay.
the
I'm right on
only thing I would say is
the
that PPT is charged with that determination, which the parents are part of.
Well, they get an appeal and, you know, just go through the process, but that's, you know.
Well, I think that comes back to that 3-pager of the parent getting notice about what the meeting is and how to be prepared for it. If the parent knows what the manifestation hearing is about and realizes the impact it could have on their child, the more knowledgeable the parent is, the less of an issue it could be in the long term. I would think, like, less you would be needed if a parent knew what they were walking into.
I disagree to a certain
Okay.
point, as, like, because we get those same kind of calls, and, you know, if the student has something like a learning disability, but also has ADHD and Tourette's, but their primary disability category is SLD, have principals that are set, you know, saying, nope, it's not that, and that,
But if you walk in and you know the law,
that doesn't matter.
well, I
Sometimes
don't
it
know, I
matters.
mean, yeah.
It can help, but if the team doesn't know it.
Yeah,
Well,
the only thing I would say, not only thing, but just in addition to that too. Sorry, is that, because it's a really important discussion is, I mean, you're reviewing the IEP. So are there goals and objectives and present levels in the IEP that are addressing the area? If not, you should go back and look at that as a PPT also, because I know we have information about doing the, reviewing the behavior intervention plan, looking at FBAs, have they been conducted or not? Because if a student is exhibiting a behavior that's impacting and requires specialized instruction, should be in the, even though they have a specific learning disability, they should have goals and objectives to not, or to reduce the behaviors that lend themselves to those situations of manifestation. So, I mean, it is important. I think we were talking a lot about in-school suspension, but again, I go back to special education and issues and students with IEPs accessing services during in-school suspension. I feel like that's more where we should be focused on versus taking on that entire issue.
The reason I'm sort of coming around to this idea of the free pager is not just to educate parents, but also educate districts.
They have it too, everybody in the team.
It's common.
Playing by the same rules.
Playing with the same, they know what the rules are walking into the meeting.
The other interesting that happens sorry, Catherine, in our state is that a change in placement is after 10 days. But most manifestation determinations happen in advance of that. Some don't happen, some don't put the patterns together, so there's 3 days here, 3 days there, but it's that concept of change in placement's complicated. Like we're changing the student's placement by not having them access their IEP in the way that it's designed. So it's
Right, and
not
I
an
think that
easy
goes back
concept
to
for,
my favorite word of the day, training.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
In all honesty,
Yeah.
that's the training piece, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you see the variability between district to district.
Yeah.
Because of the training and the knowledge of staff within the district.
Mhm. There is a question
I
that,
hate to recommend this, but maybe it's even looking at the manifestation form that teams go through.
yeah,
That's more specific,
Yeah.
with more specific questions.
some tools to go along with the
Yeah,
question.
tools, and then that goes into your 3-page packet, so they have that information.
So that's
Now
a
it's
guide, that's a
5
guide
pages,
discussion,
right?
I mean, forms guide discussion. Like,
Yes,
Now,
they do.
now we're up to a 5-page packet,
Forms
but,
guide discussion, so
Yeah.
if it's more nuanced as to like,
and that's where we can put okay, what's the primary disability on the IEP? What other disabilities are
Yes.
known,
Yes.
right? Because that is something that not all teams
Yes.
think about.
And some disabilities may not be known yet. And
Yes,
it need to be,
yeah.
what
Is
other
there-
disabilities
right.
need to be added
Right,
in
what other
because these
questions?
patterns of behavior
Yeah.
occurred and now we know
The
something.
number
more.
of times my teams come out of a manifestation with more information is required, we're recommending evaluation is almost more than it is they actually determine the manifestation. So just like coming up with some of those on that main sheet might be helpful as a guidance to teams and to parents.
giving scenarios, giving examples and scenarios, I think would be super helpful. If you see
Yeah.
it, if you're in this position,
Yep.
Okay, well, I think we have some level of consensus on this, that,
forms matter a lot.
and, so the idea is that Catherine.
Just killing trees,
Catherine will write
that's
will
it.
write a 3-pager
Electronic.
to be submitted to Brian for approval.
Great. We're gonna, Brian's gonna work collaboratively on it.
Ryan, you said you wanted a working meeting with me.
Next
Now
Thursday,
we have a lot of things on.
yeah. There we go.
Yes, Claire.
You're gonna have to have lunch.
Are we done with
Thank
behavior?
you all. Are we all done?
Just quick, the last, we put the recommendation, the task force recommends that the legislature take steps to encourage the creation of all. We're taking that out. We're not, that's not part of this right now, right?
Well, we're not doing recommendations, no.
Okay, but so that.
Yes.
Okay.
But we are doing a finding in terms of resources.
Finding
Therapeutic
resources.
safety,
Yeah, we are not.
I just want to make sure.
Okay, before we move on to the staff shortages, just in the, just because I have to leave for that meeting, can we agree that our next meeting is scheduled for February 13th? We'll go back to 9:30 to 11:30. Just because I think we can finish up, you may even get to it today, but I think we can finish up on the 13th and, Representative Curry made it very clear that he, is not rushing this and he wants to make sure that we have enough discussion. So I'm thinking we could finish up on the thirteenth. Andy can work his magic on a report.
Yeah, I'll get you some, I'll get revisions of this one.
Yeah, Yeah, and we'll come back and, discuss it. And again, I apologize for having to leave early after I wanted the longer length of the meeting.
Just with the catering truck shows up.
Yeah, the catering truck is there, so you're okay, you're in good hands. All right, so staff shortages.
Anybody got a solution to staff shortages? Okay, next issue.
Yeah. What is it looking like these days in special ed,
What level
staff
is it?
shortages?
Everything.
Everything is.
Teachers, parents, everybody calls.
Well,
Yeah.
driver.
Van drivers.
Yeah.
You know what the interesting thing is? Maybe, I'm just not hearing it a lot now. I'm not hearing a lot about it. Do you think it's just because people are just settling in that this is just reality? Because I'm not hearing it and it worries me.
I'm not as much.
Yeah, I was wondering if it got better or,
And paraprofessionals are less, I don't think it's better. I think people are adjusting to what they have to have in front of them.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not best for kids at all,
No,
but it's our current landscape and there's no end in sight. So you have to deal with the landscape that's in front of you right now.
Well, there is a cliff in sight.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cliff is there.
And I think the other two things that are
So
happening.
we're just not looking,
right now-
we're not looking down.
I think this year from a numbers perspective, there were more bodies and seats at the beginning of the year, but I think you looked at kind of quality and training of individuals from 5 years ago versus now.
Yeah.
There's a big difference and the number of people that are in DSAP or long-term substitute positions with the flexibilities offered by the state versus a number of years ago, it's a big difference.
Well,
So maybe.
but
less
what data can we collect to demonstrate that? I mean, I asked Ajit for data on DSAP's, regular ed versus special ed, and over the last 5 years, 12% of the new hires in general ed were DSAPs, and 24% in special ed were DSAPs.
Double.
What does that tell us? I don't know what it tells us.
If it's double.
It's not, it's higher. It's higher, yes.
And what was it 5 years ago?
This was over a 5 year period.
Oh,
okay.
Was the data, so I mean, it's just lumped together.
Yeah, but.
And I think the trends are probably getting worse.
so this is just a,
But wait, Jordan,
I'm sorry.
I am loath to put in a report that the quality and training of new staff is lower than staff 5 years ago, unless we have some really hard data to back that up.
Right, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. There's 217 openings on CT REAP right now for special education teachers. That's a lot.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yep, it's January.
And it's January. And I would say a lot of these were posted in January. Ooh, look at that.
I'm wondering, I'm sure they're in the most challenged
special ed?
districts too.
Yeah, special.
And I think earlier you spoke, Andy, in a previous section about talking to Central and like 39.
Or specialized programs.
That versus
100.
years before.
Yeah.
And I think one of our findings could be around the
Amy,
percentage of
say that again.
teachers for special
100
ed that are
posted in
DSAP and
Oh, my gosh.
well, and recommending potentially training or support for those individuals, because that is our next wave of teachers, like we're hoping that all these DSAPs will turn into long-term special education teachers.
There is another task force working on that very issue that we spent all of yesterday about.
Yes.
Sally, what about your students? Okay. Low.
Yeah, well, so I just was thinking that I know, the IEP quality training added a group for DSAP, so they're trying to attend to that, give them that attention. We're having a difficult time recruiting, so we just got approved for a new MAT program, working with, Stanford Public Schools and their paraeducators, and they're having a hard time getting a viable pool to commit, but we're trying to be really nimble, but we're not getting the students either. We do have a solid pipeline of elementary candidates that we're getting cross-endorsed in special ed. And most of them are understand that you're gonna get a special ed job first, like that's what you're gonna get, and they are signing up for this, so we have that option. But it's hard, it's hard. We've been working on this for a while across universities, they're not, people aren't out there.
No,
That we're
that's
just.
not.
they're just-
Okay, good. So the number you said, the number's down for people who just want special education, but they're not down for all of them.
No, it's down across.
Okay.
It is down across the board, but special ed is worse than that.
That's okay, and this thing, so the SAC is recommending that, internships be compensated. The students aren't doing their student teaching, taking classes and having to have a part-time job, and that includes social workers, school psychologists. It's really hard for, that would be a great recruiting.
It helps, I think that will help. We actually have residency programs that are subsidized by the district. So that helps, but it's still, we're still having a hard time finding the people to even bring into those programs.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. And social media is not helping us with our newer generations, like TikTok is.
Have you reached out to Unified? Because we're also talking about a push for unified programming for those students that are working with Unified Theater, and that's where your passion, that's a place, you gotta find people with passion.
Right.
Right? And-
Yeah, we haven't done that yet,
Right.
but yeah,
Okay.
I'm open if you, send them our way. We can pay for them, we can get them, certified, but, a
Well,
lot
my,
of
I think my concern is there is this other, CECC working on certification issues of new teachers. Generally, I think it's really important for this task force to make a point that while there's a problem for general ed teachers, there's a crisis for special ed teachers.
Yeah.
And maybe even beyond the crisis for paraprofessionals.
Okay, yeah.
I think you're missing speech pathology.
That's what I was gonna say.
School
All
psychology.
All of the support services, I think counseling, all of it, all related services.
But, and, and I think, it's clear we've got a problem. Where are we going with this? I mean, the state's got all sorts of programs out there to try to reciprocity and, and DSAPs, things like that to bring in teachers, but obviously it's not enough. And there's some, I guess, maybe. Let me ask this question. Are there quality issues with DSAPs?
Oh, yeah, I mean, they're learning as they go, but I think, if you're partnered with an appropriate university and you have strong mentors, you can be successful. So there's a lot more that has to go into it than a traditional candidate who has their student teaching that gets to be with a cooperating teacher for that length of time, in a scaffolded setting.
So what are the perks of it?
What are the perks of
Because
DSAP?
they already know the school, that's the perk?
Well, that's a perk, they get paid.
You get paid.
They get paid.
Oh, sorry, you were that.
I lived it, that's how I got my certification, I worked at CES, that became, I went back for my degree, then it was like, well, you could DSAP because you're in this program, it offers it. I was able to have the resources, like I said, the support for me, it was perfect, and we did that with a lot of people.
And
We
no
started
student
doing-
teaching.
Yeah, we started doing all that and had a little cohort.
Were you a parent?
Yeah. I was.
You had the support of a cohort, that's huge.
Yeah, the cohort.
Yes, cohort.
It's a big
Cohort
deal.
model is
Yeah.
huge.
And we've been trying to do that, it just, we are getting the parents to come in with, and they don't have the degree.
Right.
So we came in with a degree, they don't have the degree.
Right, that's another issue.
And you have some fabulous people, just, they don't have, they didn't have the recourse to finish a degree.
Yeah.
I just had my parent talked about this yesterday, and he's of color, and he would be a phenomenal person, but he doesn't have the degree. So at least to get
And
it
he
down.
gets support getting the degree?
Well, we're offering more money for, reimbursement, go back to school. I don't know if he had, I don't know if he could do it. So that's, the people that really want.
Personal decision, yeah.
Program.
That's a huge job.
To go back to university.
Years, like.
I know. Exactly.
A lot of them got 1 year, maybe they have 10 credits. They need 60, so. That's what we found here, like, a lot of our best parents, we want to be sped teachers, they're just not that close to having a degree.
Well, I mean, my concern is, one, look, the biggest issue here is getting bodies, it's getting bodies in there. At the same time, do we want to make recommendations that actually choke off that pipeline by having greater requirements for DSAPs or greater requirements for parents who are becoming special ed teachers?
No, I think it's around pathways to bachelor's degrees for paras, and also one of the barriers that we see a lot is the ability to pass the standardized tests.
Yeah.
That is the biggest barrier that we see in terms of candidates can be great and great in the classroom, but for whatever reason, they're unable to pass standardized tests.
Well, I'm trying to come up with something that we can actually come around with this recommendation that would actually deal with the problem.
Alternate pathways to certification
Yeah.
would still be contributing help.
Well, there's the I keep saying the teacher residency program for special ed, right now they started, but again, it's finding the people who want to do it.
I would also consider, it would be really helpful if Connecticut offered a more, an easier route for out-of-state graduates to teach in Connecticut. It's impossible for many, graduates to come into Connecticut because they have to take extra courses and they can't be certified right away.
So reciprocity of the certification?
Yeah, it's really, we're really stringent on reciprocity, so that may be
But
something.
that's not a special ed issue.
It's not, but it can
But
be.
I
can
think
be.
We have a
flexibility
teacher
in
that
the
was
student
working
movement.
for us who still has.
Connecticut students out of state with special ed, how much?
Why not?
But I don't
Right.
think they really that one.
Yeah, why should we have to stay?
They don't fit talking back.
Well-
It's like the best quality and.
What's your feeling on recommending higher pay as a way to attract more special ed teachers?
It's a sticky, there I am, but it's a sticky wicket, because then you're pitting general and
Yes,
special
that's
ed
what I
against
would
each
say.
other. Why is this job better than the other? It
I think
becomes,
that's
not.
I mean, the,
great.
I mean, I want higher
The
pay for all
national
teachers.
research shows that the pay would be helpful, but isn't enough of an incentive. It's really the working conditions and
Yes.
support. So,
And your partners at work.
But I don't disagree with you. I think that's what's hard to keep people in our programs. Like, if we pay people in the program more money than people not in the programs, we could probably keep somewhere else as a program staff that, because once a regular ed job comes open, they bail on us our own regular ed jobs. I know it puts the union against each other, it puts the math teachers against the special teachers,
Yeah.
but it is a
They
reason
leave
why
as
we have
soon as
trouble
there's
keeping
a
our
regular-
autism program or behavior program staff.
Yeah.
Because once we have a general sped teacher opening, they're like,
They leave
I'm
right
out.
away. Yeah.
Catherine, you have a solution?
We talked, maybe.
I don't want to hear about problem,
No,
I want a solution.
That's all I had to say. We talked about this a couple of meetings ago. I will remind you of a solution that we talked about, which is we were talking about caseloads, and then that's really complex because of different students' needs, et cetera. But having been across many different districts, just in terms of experience, there are so many districts that they just do administration so differently, and so I feel like it'd be a huge, I feel like it'd be much more attractive to do this kind of work and not have the amount of paperwork, you know, that's a huge concern. So why can't we recommend / require, but have an administrative position that is doing more of the paperwork? So whether it's a special ed supervisor, PPT chair, special ed secretary, or, you know, admin person, like, it's just so different in every district, and I wish there was a way that we could take some of the load off the teachers so they could do the part that they loved and not feel, you know, that difference in work. That's what feels the difference in the workload, I'm sure, in regular ed, is the paperwork and the meetings. So
so the finding is that the workload, that the administrative workload interferes with their ability to deliver services and leads to burnout.
But there's a
in
way
that
we could
field.
deal with ratios in that way, like say, okay, for every, and again, I don't like a prescriptive solution, but like seeing some districts just do it so differently, where if there's a PPT chair at a school in New Haven, say if they don't have that in Bridgeport, for example, I'm working with the PPT chair to set up the PPT and not bothering the special ed teacher every other day about scheduling. It's just a small thing, but it's like a lot of their attention that really should be focused on kids and hours.
Sorry. But I think there, at least conceptually, there are two sides to this. One is the compensation side, and clearly don't have consensus on that. And the other is working conditions, and paperwork is part of working conditions. Safety is another part of working conditions, caseloads another part of working conditions. And what else? Brian, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say that I keep going back to the certification of K-12 and now pre-K. there's a whole range of students to support within that context. Is there a way without micro-credentialing, we can prepare educators to work with high needs population versus low need? Or
So kind of like some other states do where you get a degree in learning disabilities as opposed to a degree in
Versus-
behavior
or just, you know,
I would say that would really limit our opportunities to hire staff. When we moved it
Sure.
from pre-K-12 to K-12, do you know
Yeah.
how difficult it is to hire preschool teachers now? Right? So,
yeah, I'm not saying
I think it's a
I'm not
good-
saying it solves the issue, but
Right.
it helps
right.
in the leaving or, you know, as soon as something's open, that person's choosing to do that and they're prepared to do it. Versus an
Right.
administrator placing someone there. It takes away flexibility. So that's why I'm saying there's pros and cons.
Right.
But is there a way without requiring that to help prepare people to be in the positions that they're in?
That's right.
Well, but I mean, that, you know, if the problem is flow in the pipeline, dividing up the pipeline seems to be to just reduce flow.
Or you might actually have less teachers go into behavioral
Well, that's it.
because of the safety concerns versus, I mean, I feel like
Yeah,
you
but
might
when you
have
have a
some flow
teacher that
better than others.
Really loves working with students with behaviors. They are
Mhm.
phenomenal.
They are, but how many of those can you find?
And I know your master's programs, at least when I went through, Southern, you could choose autism, you could choose like all or therapeutic. So there are still ways to get your master's and get that specific. But you get who you have in your classroom. I mean, that's reality. Our kids have very different.
And there is no, and this is actually something that one of my staff members said to me last week. Well, I don't know how to teach behaviors. I'm like, well, you're a special education teacher, so you have to, right? So, yeah, you're a resource teacher, but I'm sorry, you can't choose which disability you
Behavior
teach to.
competent. Yeah.
Right? Like the behaviors come with it.
For
So,
all kids.
but that goes to, like, they just don't feel comfortable with the variety of disabilities they have. So I do see that piece.
Well, but, I mean, you probably have some difficult to fill positions in your
You do.
behavior room.
I guess,
And if you're taking a
right.
resource teacher and saying, hey, you know, I'm gonna reassign you to the behavior room, you may lose that teacher, right?
You might, but I guess my point of that was, no special education teacher today is working in isolation, right?
Right.
So even a resource teacher that's supposed to be focusing on learning disabilities say, I'm sorry, that kid's not coming with you with just a learning disability. You're gonna have to deal with all the other things. So how do we prepare them better to be more diverse?
Yeah.
So they can really work with the whole child and not say, oh, I don't do behaviors. I've never learned how to do
Yeah.
that. Right? Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
It does.
Well, that's what,
And
that's the model of the behavior-free kid with a disability that cares so much.
Which I'm sorry, we don't see, and we don't see a developmentally delayed 3-year-old anymore, either. They're so complex. Kids today are so complex.
Well, I mean, if we have problems, I assume this is the problem of filling staffing behavior rooms. If we have problems staffing behavior rooms, other than compensation, what else can we do to allow, to have people be willing to work there?
I feel like self-contained, like I know you don't wanna differentiate, payment, but self-contained people are extra special. Like, I mean, if it's a regular caseload, I'm not gonna cheer it, but like, that is a very, very, very specialized person. That's like the most special of the special ed. Like, I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like of all things, that would be, you know, the most, appropriate to incentivize.
Well,
But in a regular
Very
ed
least.
school, and you have one self-contained classroom, it's not always the teacher's choice whether they're in that classroom. In a setting where Stephanie works, they're choosing that. So I think you're gonna pit teachers against each other
And I
there.
mean, we love, because we have to negotiate contracts. I mean, aren't we always doing that?
We are.
And try to get pay just for pay for anybody is becoming difficult. So I don't know, I love it to say, hey,
You get a stipend if you're in a self-contained class, but that would kill districts.
No, it would. The thing is, yeah, you still have to look broadly, and I'm sure people at CA are happy with me saying that, but we're trying to get it for everybody, because there's a shortage everywhere, and I know it's a special ed, but it's a shortage everywhere. That's the
I think
problem.
my only point is that it's just, that's different enough to justify it. I think that was my only.
Yep.
Well, I assure you, the line,
An expert.
self-contained or most special ed teachers is not gonna end up in the report.
But it's on the tape, so.
We do not disagree with you. Totally agree.
Well,
So where are we in the report? Staffing?
that's where we are. We're trying
I
to
know.
see what
I mean-
what we can talk about as making a finding in terms of staffing. I mean, it is
So the
not.
finding
helpful.
is that there's definitely a critical need.
Right.
And
Yeah, you
there-
said crisis, it's a crisis for all
And
related services.
With multiple reasons.
I think I mean, we know there's a, a committee looking at this, and that committee has to continue, and it has to be cross-representation of how,
Right.
this is a shared challenge. And so we have to continue to partner across stakeholder groups to try to solve it. It's not so simple, and so I think that work, clearly, we all know has to continue, and we have to.
And it's important to note that it's not just the recruitment, it's the retention.
Yes.
And the retention of all fields, whether they're leaving for private practice or they're leaving off the field altogether and deciding that, they can't handle the mental health needs as a school psychologist, they just need to go do another job. It's real.
Well,
We're seeing.
we didn't, I mean, you gotta have some data on retention, right? You gotta have data on,
What does that-
how long teachers stay, when they leave.
You don't,
You
It's not
don't.
something we collect.
no. I was able to check back, and they said it's not something we have available readily.
I mean, it's such an important point to make, and I don't wanna do it on anecdotal data.
I mean, even trying to collect all that, even when you leave your district to go to another district, it's never accurately portrayed. Some people will say
Correct.
something just to,
Get out.
I just want to go.
It's
I gotta go
true.
nicely.
Bridges in a
Like
small
exit
state.
interviews,
Like in interviews, but stay interviews, I think I brought this up
Yes.
before, why do people stay?
Correct.
And I think our district's doing it, it might be a state run type something, where why do people stay, and trying to get information about that.
Well, we have a paper, that's actually under review right now, that we surveyed all special ed teachers in the state. We got 894 responses, and that was in 2021. So we do have the why, we have responses on that. Why did you say, what influences? So I mean, I can share that, but it's in the process of.
Well, that's at least something to say.
Yeah, something.
So Amy, how many teachers you lose how many special ed teachers you lose last year?
Last year to retirement, I lost 4, but they were all retirement age. I lost a school psychologist to the profession altogether. She went back to law school. And I lost. That's it. I didn't lose many. I don't have a hard time keeping staff in my district. And I can't answer that why. But,
You're
my
so
staff,
wonderful to work for?
I would like to say that, but I don't know.
We're doing the wellness work. I mean,
Yeah, we try, but if you look at, I'll point to Meriden because he's here. I know she's losing staff left and right. And, Waterbury, like the
Yeah.
cities
I
are
never
losing
had
it. If you're in a position, and because I was New Fairfield, I can, speak to this. If you're in a town that's on the outskirts and you're not easily accessible, you're struggling to get staff, because I can work in the center of the state in Middletown and get there within a half hour, but to get to New Fairfield, that's an hour and a half ride. Why am I gonna go there? Right? And then if I live in New York, it's hard to teach in Connecticut. So
Teachers are going to New York, because you get
paid a heck of a lot more in New
And you
York,
get GPO, yeah.
Massachusetts, so
But even within Connecticut, I mean, a teacher from Hartford, go to West Hartford and make $20,000 more.
If you can't live in the
Exactly.
community.
Exactly, right.
Well, how did it work? Do you know your figures on Meriden on special ed teachers?
How long you get? I think you probably like 60.
Yeah.
60.
60, no, not down 60, probably 60 changes this. in the-
Yeah,
in the year. Yeah.
Patty and I had a conversation.
Probably over the
this
past
summer
year, like a
with,
year, probably starting from when the school year is now. I don't think, we think we're down like 3 or 4 only now that are open.
I do
But
take
people
a
are-
lot, and I take a lot.
No, no.
And I'm not like social workers, like I'm not just counting.
Special
No,
services.
but I have the whole special service, social
Yeah.
workers, psychologists.
Yeah.
The state had taken a lot from us, because Wilcox right down the road, they pay more money. So
Right,
they
tech
grabbed like
schools.
a couple psychologists, a
Right.
couple social
Yep.
workers recently.
And you lost an assistant superintendent too, right?
We lost, yes, he moved up.
Big time.
But I think the cities, it's like you said, it's all where you locate it, where the pay is. People leave for a lot of different reasons. Not, sometimes they wanna come back after, but it's.
Yeah.
None of which will use it, bring us any closer to a solution.
No.
No, I don't think it's cut and dry.
I don't,
Well,
so.
speaking of which, let's break for lunch,
Yes.
make that executive decision.
Kathleen,
Let's
you
talk.
want me?
Yeah.
We-
We're gonna talk about we.
So you have 5 minutes to get your food and then we're.
Yeah.
There's quite the
Welcome to
spread.
schools.
I know. We're not messing around.
Yeah.
Brett doesn't even get lunch.
No, I know.
Certainly be certified.
Yeah, there's no like Panera.
Oh, yeah.
I like all these
Step up,
Yeah.
bags of popcorn or whatever.
That's true, would you start going to Sherman?
So we're, we had two teachers apply for a Spanish position, one didn't even speak Spanish. The other one
Okay.
came December because they're trying to add classes to their schedule. Two interviews for, and we pay a lot, but it's a half hour civilization to apply. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like, you don't, nobody's. It's fine.
It is,
But yeah, we have, when we interviewed for. So we had to take that. Because it's one of the. How do you apply for a job? Amazing to me. Yeah, well, I know, because I'm like.
But it's real, where are you going? Zero.
Yeah.
And then they get Washington. It's right Yeah, I live in Middlebury. Region Philip has no after school activities, so careful on your way home today.
Yeah, my son.
For the
Let's
staff
say-
shortage, but we're not gonna tell them.
I don't want anyone to steal our ideas.
Besides housing stipend, are there any, does anybody have an off the wall idea to throw out on the table that might make a difference we can talk about? Do we have anything to offer on this?
Did you talk about?
Wait, we got somebody, she's got food in her mouth, but.
All right, did you talk about?
Brilliant idea. Well, no, I know that within Connecticut, we have, a group of teachers who are certified of color that somehow are not working as school teachers, like over 600. We had gotten information a couple of years ago about that. So we have a whole population of teachers that.
Wait, what are they doing?
Not
teaching.
working. I'm not sure where they are.
Could they be an admin?
I don't believe so.
Cause I show up as not using my special ed certification.
Me too.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, that might be more, I don't know, because Brian, do you know of any of that, like numbers? As you were reading, sorry.
No, it's okay. There is a list that that of active unassigned certificates. So that may be what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
Mhm.
now why they're not,
I've heard a couple of things is that they've had many interviews and not been hired.
right?
And then the other issue may be they're working in other capacities, but
That's 600, is that?
Over 600.
There's a lot.
Minority.
There's a-
Everybody.
I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know if they're all
Is
minority.
that something you get, like they say, my son's school, they'll say, make sure you wear a nice outfit, this is school.
Right.
We do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think these are people who are not applying for jobs.
Oh, I
But that's like, yeah,
I think they're
no
all-
openings, like, I think we're trying to recapture back into the workforce.
Thank you.
Who manages the website that has all the vacancies on it?
That's,
CT Read?
Which website?
CGB.
That feeds from both district postings, doesn't it?
Yeah, but who manages them?
I don't know.
I mean, I wonder whether they have, there's any data on, who clicks on and whether they're all
Yeah.
I'm sure
employee
they
or
have.
whether they're people on it looking
Yeah,
for
a lot of
jobs.
people.
Yeah, we have-
click on them.
So we contract with TACE out of Utah State for a special education specific, in addition to CT REAP, it's called Connecticut Special Educator Employment System. So we have data on that, how many hits it gets, how many openings, how many hirings we've had.
I've never even heard of that.
Neither have I.
yeah.
My district uses that.
Yeah, so I can send that out, we get data on a
Can
monthly
you say
basis on
again?
that.
Name?
There's been Connecticut Special Education Educator
One of those.
Your accent,
System.
CTSE.
EES.
Okay, system. Thank you.
So I can send that data that so that's been a relatively new, that started during the pandemic. And then we've been funding it ever since.
We don't know whether those are new people or people trying to switch jobs.
That's correct. But we're closing in on 700 hirees through that process. Social media is the number one way to communicate through, so they'll do social media marketing for districts, as long as they contact.
Anyone say anything about, the paperwork in special ed?
Yes.
Yeah.
We talked about working conditions.
Okay.
But
We talked,
specifically the paperwork.
the paper was one of them, but
Safety and caseload too.
caseload was one.
Yeah.
And then we talked about differential pay, which got a big no.
But can we do it again? Ratios are nice, just quantifiable. So can't we say like for every blank number of students in a district, we have to have some kind of admin support? Like, can we be more prescriptive about it?
Like admin, meaning like administrator, administrative, sorry, that's what I meant. I meant administrative. not-
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Sorry,
I'm using,
yeah, no, I know what you meant, okay.
and again, I know people don't like that, but I think like some kind of really strong statement that if you're a district this size, you need this many people to do record requests and schedule PPTs and just a thought.
I want.
Can somebody here who's a practicing special ed teacher?
That would be nice.
Talk about what paperwork. for
She's too close, you have
And
to.
how much of it actually can be given away to somebody else?
I mean, I'm teaching all day long. At the end of the school day, you're trying to do the paperwork and not stay, like last night I was at school until 6:30. I mean, that's a long day. And knowing full well I won't be there today, I'm gonna be doing that after I go to Hartford and do my work. We need para support. I need the parents in my room. I checked all this morning, like, did they give you somebody? Are you all alone in the pocket? Blah, 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 you know, I'm going, freaking out, making sure we have the support. We need physical one, so I can do the paperwork. We have people that help us with that, but even that, you keep getting a little more put on your plate. Nothing ever gets taken on. It's always one more thing, like, now you have to put in, for CT says, you have to put in, blah, 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 where with somebody else doing it, now we're doing pieces that wasn't. And it could have been that we had a great person doing it at the beginning, and now she needs to give, you know, she has other stuff going on.
And in a regular ed school, your case management load may not be the kids that you're supporting in classes either. So you may be the case manager for a student, but you're not actually with that student in those classes. So now you're managing and trying to get all of the reports from everybody so that you can do your part. We're an agri-science district, so we have kids out of district where we have to get reports from other districts as well to finalize CT sets. That is a substantial lift for teachers that are trying to not just manage the paperwork. So some of that could be done. We do have people that schedule for us, that schedule PPTs and 504s. They're actually two different people, which is interesting because they don't always talk to each other. And we're a very small district. But some of the paperwork could be done by, somebody managing the case, at least getting the reports from all the people. That is not the special ed teacher, like somebody that could manage making sure everybody's doing their part, because a teacher also doesn't want to be tattletaling on the speech pathologist for not getting the report in on time. Like, it's not their job to manage the speech pathologist, but they're put into a position where they have to.
Almost like the compliance component, like.
That's a difficult
collecting it,
piece,
following up
because
with
they don't have any say over what the speech pathologist does, but,
But a clerical person's not gonna help with that.
they might be able to set reminders or like remind them or ask them, but when you're spending half of your day reminding people, hey, there's a PPT, the band teacher never gave me the report on the kid, and we've got to talk about why, there's more to it. You've got to get all the regular ed teachers, you've got to get all of the specialists that are involved in the kids' education. And you're just trying to manage that meeting. Somebody else could be doing that work of reminding the math teacher, reminding the band teacher, walking down to the band teacher and say, you need to write the report. This kid's cutting a class, we need to know why, write something down so that we have something to talk about at this meeting.
And then add in a triennial.
Right, and the testing, we have outside services doing some of our testing for us.
So in your view, this is a viable idea to have.
Yeah, administrative support, absolutely.
Let's talk about clericals.
Clerical, administrative, that's what I.
That's a huge financial burden on districts.
It is.
Is it a parallel person?
Could be a secretary.
Yeah,
Could be an additional secretary for special education.
it's a non-certified staffing position. That's what how you would kind of categorize it.
Is there agreement that this is something that we should add as a finding?
That sounds like a recommendation.
Well, we're not
A
question it out.
consideration.
I think your
To
finding would be
explore
that the paperwork involved in special education is
Clerical tasks.
it's a burden, or not a burden, but definitely.
A deterrent.
It's an added responsibility to teachers who already are overburdened.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
something like
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
teachers, special ed teachers have said to me, I chose this field to teach and make a difference with kids, not to fill out paperwork.
And I would argue, right? And I know it's probably an unpopular, how can you do your job if you're not writing the IEP? Because that IEP should be directing everything that you do with that child, right? So I understand that it's difficult and an added workload, and I remember that as well, but it's a critical piece of your planning and your preparation time.
I don't think they're complaining about writing the goals and objectives. I think they're complaining about the other pieces.
Like
Or
the
having-
coordination.
The coordination of the, yeah.
Or
Which
having
is,
time to
which
do
is
it,
different, right? So I would
you know, having the time to do it within the school.
caution saying that the paperwork, maybe we could say
Let's be
the,
specific about what tax.
right,
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
fine with that. I don't know. I never went
Um,
deeper to see what they were actually talking about.
I will say the evaluation piece, the time,
Yeah.
and the availability for evaluators, the time involved, the time it takes away from students is definitely a burden. I hate to use the word burden because it's not a burden, but it's definitely a time,
It's like a
a
competing,
time.
In the academic.
it's like a competing pressure for
It
time.
is.
I mean,
It is.
That's not something you can do anything.
I think we're talking about,
Well, we could.
we're talking about time away from students, really, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's all right,
Well,
right?
Brian, you said we could do something about it.
Well, I'm just saying, with regard to the evals, the prior written notice timeline increased, I don't know the exact year, but since maybe in the last 10 years to 10 days for parents. Whereas our evaluation stayed the same, so we have
Correct.
45 school days. Meaning the team has to meet on the 35th day to have that IEP, give the parents their
Which is
right.
usually they have 25 school days to test, because they need the 10 after to make sure they have the timeline, and then they've got to have the meeting at least 15 days before, so it's a tight window. But so the window definitely is a times issue, but also the number, right? Because our caseloads are high, and we've been talking about that. Caseloads are high because our staffs are short. It's the triennials, it's everything, and you know, the state did a great job of, providing some relief, during COVID, of having RESCs complete some evaluations.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily it's hard to outsource
Yes.
evaluations,
Yes.
because I'm gonna go back to my
It's like
soapbox.
outsourcing IEP.
The evaluation, right, guides
Yeah.
the whole process, so, it's almost like districts need individuals totally focused on, I'm the evaluator, right? And they're supporting the other staff in that piece. So then there's less of a stress on individuals, but that's a huge financial burden, and we don't have the staff to do that as it is. So it's an option, but it's not a viable option.
Okay, let's
You can
Let's talk
recommend
about,
that's
let's move on to other working conditions that we might be able to.
Right,
We talked about the dangers of the self-contained classroom. But I don't hear anything that we can do about that. Is there anything?
I don't think we've talked about that, no.
Dangers is a tough word.
Yeah, I don't think we talked about it. I think it's in the report, but we didn't discuss it here.
Well, we did discuss it.
We did?
Before, but, is there anything, I mean. What I hear from a lot of special education teachers is, you know, the danger of injury that they face. But I don't think, unless you have some ideas, I don't think there's anything we can do about that.
I feel like we're going back to the previous conversation.
I
with
would, I
behavior.
agree. That's not.
Being that I am a self-contained classroom teacher and I do the best I can every day to make sure there aren't behaviors as best as I can, just because it's better for the kids, whatever, but they pop up. Do I find sometimes I'm by myself more than I should be, you know, at certain, and I need help? Yes, I do, because we have a staffing shortage. But I think it depends on the classroom. And, you know, I have to say, where I work, we try to do the best to put the kids in that are developmentally appropriate to each other. And that we give them the staffing, you know, perhaps they get more staffing because of the challenges and the needs that they have. I think we do have dangerous situations in places that may be down lots of teachers, you know,
What was the verb there?
down, like that were, you know, they have more issues because of the fact that they're down teachers instead, you know.
Right.
Staffing shortages, yeah.
I don't think you can separate the chicken from the egg,
No,
right, so
Well-
it's difficult.
Just trying to think through things we could recommend dealing with staffing shortages, and we're talking about working conditions. Um,
Well, the safety also, I'm sorry, the safety also loops back to our earlier conversation
Sure.
about behavior and if we're training people and giving them the right tools and, hopefully that will decrease the incidence of some of that dysregulated behavior that leads to aggression, which increases safety for educators.
we also heard something a little bit earlier, not today, I think previous session about lack of respect for special ed teachers.
Not just special ed teachers, I think even educators.
Well, that's
Educators.
general. Is there a specific special ed issue there or no?
I actually think there is, I think a lot of gen ed teachers, maybe it's the lack of preparation, maybe special ed teachers are so focused on paperwork that they're not necessarily able to do the instruction, right? So I think that I think it's a collaboration issue, it's a co-teaching or co-planning issue that if there was more opportunity for that, then I think each the gen ed teacher and the special ed teacher would have more mutual respect, but I think a lot of gen ed teachers think, well, what do they do? They're not here, or I can't see them to plan with them. So I think it's actually a collaboration issue. And from a lot of the work we've done, special ed teachers feel like they're in the second class in a school in terms of the respect that they get from other educators or from leaders. So I think it's an issue.
Is there anything that you think can be done about that? Collaboration.
I think collaboration and time, because I think with like systems of support, I can go back to that. If everybody understands their role along the continuum, then you can elevate the profession of special ed and help. I think even training gen ed teachers on CT SEDS, which I know that they're getting to, I think that will help, because then the gen ed teachers are like, oh, this is what they've been doing. This is why they're so stressed, So I think, but I think articulating the roles and what we each bring to the table, I think that could be really helpful.
And I don't think most general ed teachers don't receive any training in co-teaching. And so when we're talking about professional development opportunities, time to work with your co-teacher, and I have a co-teacher who's actually teaching my class today. We work really well together. We've worked together for years. So there's mutual respect there. And the kids respect either I'm there or she's there or we're both there. They're still getting an education no matter what. Not every partnership works that way. And I've not received any training in the district I am to do that, other than we both reach out to make sure we get that done. So that isn't done everywhere, and I would say it's not done in most places.
Well, we can't mandate respect.
We could mandate training for co-teachers. We could not mandate, but offer like that micro-credential idea of how to work collaboratively with another human being in your classroom, how to co-teach. A lot of teachers are type A personalities that don't like to share anyway, and you're putting another human being in there that is as in charge as you are. There might need to be some training for that.
I absolutely concur. We did a lot of training at one point in time in co-teaching, in the district I was in, and made a huge difference. I mean, there are, 5 or 6 different models that can be used interchangeably, which allow both teachers to have equal access to the kids and equal respect, if you will. Because I've been in some classes that are co-taught with the general ed teacher and then the special ed teacher. You're almost not sure whether it's an aide or a teacher, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's not okay, but I think it is a matter of training. It's not just putting people together.
All right, so Lisa and Catherine.
Oh, I was just thinking, it made me think about too, often when you're a new special education teacher, you're faced with having multiple adults in your classroom and you haven't gone to school to learn how to work with adults versus managing students. And so, and that's a challenge in itself. So sometimes you can be in a classroom with, really, you could have 8 adults and that you're trying to manage the adults and lead the classroom all at the same time. So again, that's something where maybe we can think about how do we offer support in that arena, working with adults, setting the classroom up for success, because that can feel like 8 more students if you don't know what to do with, how to manage them and the
I feel like-
personality,
I feel like that's a team conversation they usually have.
Yeah.
Where, that turns into that professional, that model or.
Oh, but in
Yeah,
the
the
team
team
program,
process,
in
yeah, like
modules,
those,
yeah.
that's where you kind of have those
Yeah.
conversations. But you have who you have in your classroom, and it could be from someone greatly older than you
Yeah.
to someone just,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
high school age, and it's a very different mentality.
Or if you're the new teacher and the parent's been there for 10 years.
Yes.
That's a,
Oh, yeah.
that's a complicated.
Well,
It's very complicated even for a seasoned educator.
That's
Of
right,
course
that's
it
right.
is, absolutely.
is this a special classroom management class just for special education?
It's not management, but it's like, well, it's almost
Well,
like
part of classroom
Just
management.
do that,
tips and.
I mean, I'm doing it right now
strategies.
with one of my teachers who's who's a good teacher, great with kids, is having a difficult time managing
Yes.
the 4 paraprofessional staff in her room. The personnel conflicts,
Oh,
the
yeah.
professionalisms, making sure they're staying on top of it. I mean, it's a lot on top of teaching.
Yes, that's what I mean. It's like
And
having
depending
more
on your
students.
contract, teachers may be able to supervise or not
Correct.
supervise.
Right. They're coming from another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, it's also a really nice part of the spectrum when you're dealing, when the child and the parent are asking for a certain placement or talking to the team about a placement. It's a nice option that used to exist in a lot of the schools I worked in, and no longer do, especially in like the high school setting. So they're not, no one's required to have this option, but I would say that you really have a whole spectrum of service and you don't have this as an option.
What, the option of co-teaching?
Yeah, some school districts will put a paraprofessional in the classroom and the special ed teacher is working on intervention room. So, I believe my son never had a teacher in the classroom, just had paraprofessionals. But his special ed teacher was in a support services room. Versus the schools that I've taught and have a teacher in the classroom, not just paras, also paras, but.
Well, is there sort of the outlines of a recommendation here? I mean, not that we're making a recommendation, but just a finding that believes.
I've mentioned this before, and I don't know if anyone's already picked up the ball on this, but we don't have a special education teacher of the year, and that could be legislated. Our teacher with paraeducator, with teacher of the year, but there has not been a special educator voted in as teacher of the year. So it could get voted on district-wide, so you get district-wide recognition and accolades. And I would feel horrible if I was a special education teacher and like, there's a Miss America and Miss Junior Miss and.
Yes, it is.
I don't get anything.
Yeah, it's a good perspective.
Well,
So-
and I run our, the teacher of the year program.
Oh, you do?
So I run it for our school, and I can tell you, we have a magnet school of, general ed, and then you have all the special ed teachers. And it not always, sometimes it goes back and forth, but a lot of the times what somebody brings from the classroom in the general ed is a lot more, sells better, kind of, because they're stating where, what we're dealing with is what we deal with every day. It's not so pretty.
Our self-contained,
Right.
our self-contained
Track
teacher,
of the package.
not our self-contained, our transition teacher got it 2 years ago for our district.
Yeah,
Our speech pathologist got it a couple years ago for our district.
but they have to be in the classroom certain amount of time too, for the.
For the award.
50%.
So I'm just saying, then, to give more
That's
information.
right. There's a paraprofessional of the year, a teacher of the year. Maybe it's a nice word.
Is that really building the divide again, though?
I think just recognizing that they work is different.
Yeah.
Because,
Because
yes,
they announce
just
all
have
the
to
amazing things that they've done. That's the
Sure,
part
there's
of
one mistake they have to.
So findings.
Well, yeah, any other thoughts about staff shortage, which is where we started on this?
Sorry.
No, like, do you think most districts are still engaging in co-teaching?
Pulling away a little bit, because the special ed teachers, I think someone mentioned it, they don't always have their caseload in where they co-teach, and it's becoming difficult.
That's what I.
So I think someone said something about not having caseload, so they want to make sure they see their students as much as possible. So we're starting to limit some of the co-teaching, to give them a couple periods to see the other students on their caseload. And we're filling it with pairs, but
It's hard to manage.
Well, and as caseloads rise and staffing is short, you need to prioritize.
I'm gonna tell you, from a general ed position, having a pair in the classroom is not the same as having a teacher in the classroom. Special ed teacher, not the same.
Right. Could see that.
I would prefer a special ed teacher all day.
Well, when you get to the high school level, it's just basically resource rooms, right? Overcrowded, overloaded, or. Am I
Well, we're
correct?
not super crowded in my school, but.
What do you say? I'm sorry.
My school's very small, we're not
Oh,
very
okay.
crowded or anything.
I just, I mean,
It also goes to a bit,
high school.
I don't, probably shouldn't introduce it here, but inclusion, in the regular ed too, and what our, percentages are like for, inclusion.
Well, the special ed teacher in my classroom is not just good for the, she doesn't just work with the special ed students
Right.
either. She works with all the kids in the
Yeah.
classroom, so it's really better for everybody in the room.
Yeah, I agree, but I just remember, I don't remember the percentages, Brian, but I do remember that some students, in some categories had very low, mainstream.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is interesting, you know, and I put together the same thing, you know, inclusion, mainstream was like the biggest issue 20 years ago. And now,
PJ.
I wasn't a lawyer in the case. Now, you know, it's sort of fading back. Does anything think that we ought to say something about inclusion? LRE?
Yeah, I would say LRE, Connecticut has the highest rate of placing students in a separate school setting in the entire country. So it is a big deal in Connecticut.
I think so.
And the special ed teacher shortages make it, you know, that much harder to be able to help with that. We have, you know, kids going to outplacements, there's long wait lists for, you know, just to get into there because of staffing issues. So it's a big problem. I don't have all the answers.
I don't either.
Just one answer.
And I don't have the data in front of me, but I do remember being taken back by some of the, low numbers.
There's an OCA report about it.
Hmm?
There's an OCA report, Office of Child Advocate report, pretty recent about different districts, which disability categories in comparison to other states.
Yeah.
Send that out.
I wonder how much of that has to do with the size of our district.
That's what I was thinking.
Right, because a small district, it's really difficult to put an entire program in place within your district for one child with a high incident disability. I'm really sounding like the money person today, but I'm not, I'm really trying not, I know, I'm sorry, but it's a reality, right? As opposed to Virginia, where you've got an entire county as a school district, so you've got flexibility within that county to
Yeah.
have different schools for students, right? So it's just a different perspective of why that may be, not that I'm excusing it. But our model of each town having their own schools may lead to some of that, because it is difficult to specialize a program for one or two individual students. It makes a difference.
Yep, definitely.
Well, I mean, I think the overall theory of the IDEA was that school districts ought to have the capacity to be able to educate virtually all children with all disabilities. And it'd be an exceptional case when a kid is outplaced because the district could not hit.
And Pollyanna, gold pot I have underneath my tree, absolutely,
And, you know.
I agree.
Yep.
But then you'll go back to regionalization, not like everybody really.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and
Let's just go back to that.
it's not just staffing, it's also, having the space and the facilities that are appropriate for these types, for any type of specialized program. You can't just throw students in any classroom without a proper setting.
And the staff shortage, as you pointed out, is, also contributing to more outplacements.
Well,
And we also know there's parent advocacy in some cases
Yeah.
for an out-of-district placement, even if the district feels that
That
they
they can-
can provide
Yes.
really an appropriate in district. So there are a lot of factors that go in.
I don't know what you're talking about, Kathy.
I don't spend any time.
Well, I mean,
we have data, so we have the data, I mean, it's federal data that we collect. there's definitely been a trend in our state of less inclusive placements for students over the years. We've done some amazing work in this state for, for supports in the general education setting, not too long ago. So, we have resources, we have procedures, we have practices, there's, so it's a matter of what do we want to focus on here as a recommendation. I think, I worry about myths of inclusion and people thinking about clearing classrooms and students being placed where they're not. Sometimes when you focus on numbers with LRE, it's like shifting chairs. Okay, Johnny's now here, but he's not learning or she's not learning anything. So it's a delicate subject in the sense of individualizing the needs of the student within the context of, did we do everything we can in this environment before we move to that next step? Or is it, this happens, here's our next step? So there's a continuum, back to your point, Catherine, of like, it's a continuum of services that the school district are responsible for to go along, before, and so we can do more around that. We could focus. There we go. All set.
Now say everything you wanna say. Really quick.
We maxed out.
Maxed out.
Okay.
Well, also the timing, I'm looking at the clock and I'm like.
Is it 1 o'clock?
It's like 1
I've
o'clock.
got 50 more minutes, and I don't want to waste it.
And I don't think
But it's
we
a
can make
huge
the
topic.
assumption that co-teaching isn't happening
No.
in
No,
districts
I
at
don't
all.
Well,
think so
let's-
either.
Yeah, but let's go to the more general, I mean, we should probably, let me just suggest this as a statement of the report. That, the school districts ideally should be able to provide services for virtually all kids. Outplacement should be the exception, when districts cannot deal with those, kids. And then, inclusion with technical parents is generally a good idea.
Serve their needs.
Yeah, let's hope they don't
Yeah.
not deal with those kids.
Those
I just
dangerous
can't,
kids.
I mean,
But
I
is that
go
a
back.
finding, or is that a,
Yeah.
what is that? Yeah, I'm not sure that's a finding.
Yeah, it's a statement of policy.
It's a statement.
The planning and placement team has an awesome responsibility around placement.
Yes.
I don't know if we can say it's an exception, it's part of their role. And those outcomes have to be, there has to be steps and sequence to what, where that child is placed.
But which does not happen.
Well, it does happen, but I mean, we have to look at the numbers at the state level. You can only tell so much. There's a story behind, so. We've talked a lot about this at the state of, well, what do we do to support districts if we say, go to the district and say, here's the percentage of students that are placed out of district. What does that mean? So you would have to do a pretty individualized analysis of that, or even students that are included 80 to 100% of the time. During the pandemic, for a lot of different reasons, we were all anxious and worried about what was gonna happen to our students with special needs. One of which I was worried about that it kind of lends itself to separate. Like, what are we going to do for this population versus that? So thankfully, there wasn't that ultimate impact, because I think that teams were very creative in how they laid out their supports, but yeah, it's a culture, we're working with CCSSO on inclusive principal standards for principals for their schools and classrooms, because, there's definite, it's a culture that you create to be able to help support all kids.
Well, there was that very clear 5-step process that the learning curve laid out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not generally followed.
We could look at things like
And
our
that-
LRE checklist, say, like, does the LRE checklist need to be revised or emphasized?
I've never been to a PBT meeting where the team went over the checklist.
Yeah, so that's, yeah.
Generally, it's just, fill it out, throw it on, that's it.
Those are some of the tools that we can help look, see what are other tools that we can do to support planning and placement teams.
Okay.
Well,
It's a big topic. I mean,
well,
it's important.
Okay, those.
Yeah.
I have a question, then probably we're not adding to this table, we're taking away from this table, but have we talked about homebound, home placement, anything? Do
Have
we
we
want
talked about what?
homebound?
I don't
Okay,
think the topic has come up.
all right, I'll leave that
Well, I mean,
in the
it's,
parking lot.
well, I mean, you know, the whole issue of placements is what we've been talking about just now.
Yeah.
That extends obviously about the hospitalized all the way to general ascended, inclusive of general education setting. And,
Talk about
There
that.
is a lot of confusion
Yes.
around homebound versus instruction in the home. And the,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's, not well laid out structurally, and I think there is a lot of, warranted confusion about how one, obviously I have kids in both positions, right? Kids who I think would already need homebound and school refuses it. I have kids in the opposite situation, oftentimes waiting for placements for months and months as I continue our bond. But the process is very confusing because the regs, change somewhat in the process. So I think the way it sounds now is that you need to have medical documentation plus, so medical documentation for everybody. And if you're a student with an IEP, you need medical documentation plus, PBT decision. And I think that that's not really in line with IDEA personally, in terms of placement decision-making. So then we have a lot of districts are now pushing back a lot more on homebound, and sometimes, appropriately so, but I think that if you're requiring medical documentation to make a placement decision, that's not really in line with IDEA. I don't know what people see, and people see more people who want homebound and aren't getting it, or the opposite situation is also true. So I see it from a bunch of different angles, and the student I have right now, who's, 9 months out of school, they haven't found a placement for him yet, he's 10 years old. I did request the district bring him back in and try to make a program for him, and they're refusing to do that too. So that's that other extreme, forcing kids to stay at home.
I thought the purpose of the homebound medical paperwork was to, you don't want that to be a part of the PPT decision, because then the PPT is saying that they can educate you in school, but if you're home, they have a medical issue. Aren't they separate?
I think they're separate, but based on a lot of the research I've done, like the most current due process hearing decisions and the OCA report recommendations, especially in line pre-COVID, and that was on that, that little boy was neglected and abused at home, right? So obviously there were some restrictions placed on that, but I think the understanding from almost every team I have worked with is that you require the medical documentation plus the team deciding it. And there's a lot of pushback on documentation. Who asked for, who's this doctor, all the restrictions on, dates and specifics around why you should need homebound or not need homebound. So I think.
Which is accurate, right?
But I guess I'm not really understanding as why did that supersede or conflict with the right of a PBT to make a placement decision fully unencumbered by that requirement?
well, that's right.
It's merging two things.
Yeah.
You can
No,
make
but
it-
I'm telling you that is not clear.
I know, yeah.
Well,
That's the
I,
thing.
Yeah.
I've almost never had a PBT made decide for instruction at home absent going through the home regulations,
They absolutely think you have to.
which is not true. You
But
don't
I
have
think
to,
there's some I think there's even guidance, like I've looked up a few things that does not, doesn't make that clear, so. Maybe we can just put that for our next.
Well, I actually thought the stuff you put out during COVID was very clear on that one.
Mhm.
Yeah, but now. And now I think a lot of, again, tutoring shortage, I think there's a lot, we would probably. Imagine that there's more kids who want to be home because they were home and they haven't got, I'm not saying it's good or bad, it could go either way. But I think it's gotten much more restricted in the use of homebound, sometimes fairly so, sometimes not fairly so. And then you're like having to disagree with like the district nurse or the district doctor, and it's a very odd process.
I appreciate that, because just a lot of people want to go to homes.
Probably, they could also mean the library or whatever, but it's definitely, I think they are told to push back. I do think that that's the trend, and I do think that there's guidance indicating that, but I also think that it all of a sudden becomes this like a battle between medical professionals, maybe when it really should be placement decision. Again, we can partner with that.
Well,
Okay, there was one more issue. The next issue is universal pre-K. We're going to make a recommendation about that or not, and, or make a finding about that. And whether that's even within our jurisdiction. Thoughts on that?
Is that within our jurisdiction? Is that within our jurisdiction?
I'm sorry.
I'm doing a think aloud.
No,
Is that part of it?
I think, I'm sorry. I want to talk on this because right now we're seeing that there are 9,000 kids that are in this position, right? Of all kids, regular and, and special education students, general. And I think just the disproportionality in terms of this assessment and this waiver process is hugely problematic. And if we're assessing general education kids and special education kids with the same assessment of some sort. So I think there's a huge equity issue there, and
Well,
that is a special ed issue. That is a special ed issue.
they're not identified yet, though. Most of them won't even be identified.
Oh, they could be, why not?
Some of them are, but most.
Some of the birth.
First, the three will be, but then that's, well, the process.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking 3 to 4.
We were talking, the proposal to do universal pre-K generally, not with the change.
But those
Not
two
with
things
the
are
change
supposed
to
to
the
go,
age.
those two things are supposed to go in tandem. So I just think it makes it even more pressing than ever before. I mean, I know I've talked about this, but I have a 4-year-old right now who now can't stay in her preschool because there's no spots and might not be able to get into kindergarten. So that's just a general ed kid with an advocate parent. So special education students or the little tiny people who have IEPs are not guaranteed anything. And there's a potential of 9,000 kids total who are gonna be stuck in that position.
The school district's required to implement their IEP.
That's right.
So they have.
If they have an idea.
Right,
Well, so
there-
what if-
She just said special education.
Yeah, but like, what if you get speech 1 time a week? And
You're required to receive that.
sure, you get speech, but you might not have any preschool to go to.
That's true. That's the universal pre-K. You made a comment that
Yeah.
the districts, those kids don't have any
They don't have any
protections. The school district's required
Sure,
to implement the
Sure,
IEP.
sure, but they might not, they could have had preschool for 2 years and now have nowhere to go.
Yes.
Literally.
So
Yeah.
By the
that
time-
is recommending to the legislators that they fund university.
Well, let's separate these issues. So the issue Catherine's talking about is it's a one-time issue whenever we change the age.
Correct.
Either it's gonna be this year or
Right,
if we
it's one
want
time.
the year, it'll be next year. The same problem exists. And I don't think we're gonna be putting out recommendations to affect this
Wait,
year's
I disagree
session.
with that, I disagree with that, because I think
The session.
if they were to delay it, you don't need to have the waiver. This whole waiver was put in as a compromise. Like, which kind of just muddies it and actually makes it more problematic, and that is specifically an issue, again, just for my own kid's age. When they changed the course midstream for kids 3 and 4 years old going into kindergarten, so I think if they were to delay it or spend more time or ideally partner with universal pre-K, you could just do away with the waiver altogether, you wouldn't have the equity issue. And that's it.
Yeah.
They would have continuing care.
Yeah, I'll just say our
You
guy.
know the date, you know the date.
I was just gonna say back to the individualization for those students, our guidance on that process was twofold.
Mhm.
One, for students with IEPs, that they have access to the same process that all kids have
Right.
within the district. And then 2, there should be an individualized determination for that student based on whether they have a 504 and an IEP. Again, that's procedural and ideal. That doesn't resolve the issues of space and all of those different factors and parents' decision-making, but
But to the first point, Brian, like, if
Yeah.
we're looking at theoretically, I don't know, school readiness of some sort.
Yeah.
Like, kids with IEPs are going to be at a detriment to that, so I just. It might, I mean, to the second point, yes, maybe you'll sit down and say, no, this kid really needs it, et cetera, but like.
Yeah.
But it's also not guaranteed to be consistent. That's the other thing.
because we're talking
Yeah.
about early entry, yeah,
That's what I mean, or like
No, it's not
towns.
consistent.
yeah, because you're talking about early entry into K. That's
Right,
the
you're right,
issue. That's
it's very narrow. It's
Yeah.
Yes.
Kids with
It's
IEPs who are born
who want to
September, October.
enter kindergarten
Yes,
early,
Yes,
and then there's, individualized determinations that are needed for that.
but remember, want to, like, they would have planned that they were going to.
Mhm.
It's not just like,
Right.
that would have been the process they thought when they started preschool 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think parents may have delayed that,
Yeah.
especially if they didn't have the money or the time or the slots.
Well, I don't think this is anything we're going to voice a recommendation on prior to this session of the legislature.
I disagree.
Well, I mean, unless there's sentiment to do that, but we're now.
I think you could lose a lot of kids right there and
We're
parents.
talking about a report probably in the February optimistically now. And with that largely devoid of recommendations, although we're perfectly entitled to make recommendations. And so, I suppose one issue we ought to discuss right away is whether there's an inclination to make a recommendation concerning the change in the kindergarten start year. Okay.
I think that's too broad of a question. I mean, do we have something to say about the kids in this position? Special education students who are born in these 4 months who could be stuck without a whole day program who would have had.
The
That's-
downside, they'd be the youngest kids by far, school, everybody else stays.
But they already, right, but they already are now. Like, I mean,
Everybody else is gonna be 5, or 30, if we say all these kids just come automatically, then they would be the only kids.
but maybe not. But
Or that come.
it depends upon each kid who's trying to either get in or not get in based on the assessment.
Right, but I thought you said you wanted all the special ed kids to get it.
No, I'm just saying that it's not equitable the way they're assigned the waiver process. That's the biggest issue.
I suggest we continue it at the next meeting.
I could send,
I'm conscious of everyone's
things.
time.
That's not fair.
And I do think it is an area that is of concern. The preschool piece is huge. And especially in the most challenged districts, and the kindergarten age does concern me. I remember for many years in, Bridgeport, Hartford, New Haven, and mostly priority districts fought the change in the age. I happen to believe it's good for 5 September, but fought it until, and they've all said, until you have, we all said as superintendents, until you have preschool for every child. We don't want any kids that are not going to be served during that year, and I do worry about that.
And if you just, I mean, again, the equity piece would go away if you didn't have the waiver process. You don't have to have the waiver process, you delay it and give people another year to catch up. So you don't have to argue against it if we.
Well, I've got to say, I've been several more saying, the youngest of my class, and look what's happening.
And look at what happened.
All right, thank you all.
I'll see
you,
Like some cake before they go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Looks good.
I'll find out now.
Anyone